I'm chilling. I had the day off today. I gotta work later tonight. But um, yo, that's sick. Oh yeah. Yo, Sinlith Gang, bro.
Hey,
Stoked you came out.
what's up, man? What's number three mean? Are you talking about like T axiom?
No trans.
Oh, trans. Oh, that's interesting. I'm actually thinking about getting into that space, so I have no experience in that.
Okay.
So maybe why don't you tell me your line of argumentation, and I
It's
can
one of
think about it.
my. These four are my favorites because they are really like. I'm gonna turn the music off here. Because they really relate to me. Like I don't really come at these questions politically or anything. Like the trans
Hmm.
thing, I came at really early on because I was sort of saturated in the culture. I was curious about my own gender and my own identity. That's kind of what brought me to the space.
Oh, gotcha.
So that's probably the best way to view it, I would say. Like you don't want to view it through the lens of politics or entrenched education. View it from your own identity standpoint and really question whether or not gender applies to you and how you know what your gender is and what matters to you in terms of your gender.
Hmm.
Hmm.
So what does the word invalid do here?
Well, I mean, I'm sympathetic to all claims of gender fluidity in terms of like language. Like, I know that definitions aren't rigid, and I'm
Hmm.
fluid. I'm fluid with language, so I'm willing to accept really any definitions of terms until they become contradictory, right? Or they sort of violate some principle of logic, like a contradiction. That's when I kind of can't see the reasonability behind the claims. And it seems like definitionally, no matter how hard I try to steel man the terms, there's always a contradiction in terms.
When people use the I forgot what it's called, a cluster concept or something like that. Like, how
Yep.
do you feel about
Yep.
that?
Yeah. Necessary. Yeah. It's not like a necessary or sufficient idea. It's more of like a cluster concept. The only issue is that it seems like there is a necessary and sufficient part of the definition, and it's this incongruence, right? It's a psychosocial schema where there's an incongruence with your biological sex. So that seems like the necessary and sufficient condition. And that also doesn't seem like possible in terms of like affirming it, affirming that reality doesn't seem like a possibility to do. So like if it's a cluster concept,
Affirming what?
go. Well, if you wanted to affirm the fact that someone has a misalignment or like an incongruence, I don't know how you would affirm that identity. So, like, if I'm overweight and I want to be skinny, there's an obvious incongruence
Hmm.
between like my internal identity of who I want to be and who physically I am, right? But I can't. It doesn't make sense for me to then claim that someone has to affirm the identity of my internal identity, which is I'm skinny. How would anyone be able to
Hmm.
affirm that identity, even though internally you feel skinny, you want to be skinny, and there's an incongruence between that and your biology? To affirm that as a valid identity is literally it's a contradiction in terms. You can't be what you aren't.
So, do you think it's kind of like one of those things where it only acts as a name rather than something that like picks something out synthetic?
Analytically, I think that in terms of like analytically or being like descriptively true, I don't think there is any like truth aptness to the claim. I think it's more of like a rhetorical, emotional blunder. I think it's something like people with their good intentions sort of pave the way to hell. They mean well with language, but if they're not really formal or rigorous with their thinking, they get led astray. So most people defending these terms, I think, are really good-hearted people. They're really like they care and they're really empathetic and they want the best for those who are downtrodden and like minority groups. So they come at the space from a more like emotional standpoint, which is fine. I'm on that page. I'm totally sympathetic to that page. It's just that it's a tough battle in terms of rigorous, rational debate.
Mm, that's interesting. Does this
Hmm.
also extend to? I always get confused about like what really is the distinction between a transsexual and transgender, right?
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
because I don't know, doesn't make any sense to me. Like one of them, I mean, like I've never, um, I've always just assumed that the word woman picks out an adult female. I mean, that's how I under my
Hmm.
semantics, that's what it does, right? And then people will point out that like, look, there's no exhaustive criteria for defining what makes somebody a female. And I mean, I don't know if that's true, right? And anything you provide them, they'll find like some anomaly, right? But the thing is that it's my understanding that anomalies, by definition, don't break the definition. They just show you that there can exist a defeater for that, like some isolated defeater. Um, I don't know. It's just weird.
Okay, so another way of parsing this out, I came across this really early on in this discussion. It helped me think about these things, like in terms of cluster concepts and whether or not something is binary. Okay, and the necessary and sufficient conditions as well. A spectrum. Okay, let's say biology is on a spectrum. The outcomes of data, possible outcomes of biological biology in humans. It's on a spectrum, which I agree with. But a spectrum, and I don't know if you've heard this before, it took me a while to kind of figure this out, is bimodal. It's bimodal. It's not binary, but it is bimodal. There's two limits. There's a left and a right hand limit to the spectrum. So the anomalies you're talking about fall somewhere in the spectrum of possibilities, right? But they're like you're saying, they can't. The limits are still defined inherently through our biology. We do not grow fins and gills, and we don't lay eggs. Our biology is limited to a bimodal frame, right, of biology, of sexual reproductive outcomes, and also chromosomal outcomes, and all really any genetically any outcomes you want to look at is, if you want to put it on a bimodal spectrum, that limitation of the right hand and left hand side of the distribution outcome is still there. You can't have impossible outcomes in the data.
Uh, yeah, I understand. I think that the pushback that you would get is that whenever you're assigning a bimodal distribution, presumably there's a category, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think what they will say is that for any category that you provide, they can isolate someone that meets that your overall definition of a man that belongs in the among the distributed peak of what you would say is a woman for whatever isolated variable you're looking at.
Yeah, at that point, I would basically concede that maybe the where we draw the line is somewhat arbitrary. The gray area is actually, I'm not a doctor and I'm not a biologist, and there are probably some gray areas in terms of referencing biological distinctions and categories. I'm totally willing to concede that. That's my epistemic humility coming out in terms of my education. Like, I don't want to. I know there's biological anomalies, and that's what I'm highly sensitive to. I would never want to like discredit someone's identity in terms of those difficulties, right? Like, I'm totally empathetic and sympathetic to those. I have friends in those spaces that are totally close to me that I don't want to invalidate. But I also think it's important that if I look at myself as like a parent, that I need to have be able to validate my kids' identity without confusing them. And in terms of like statistical anomalies, I think that the relevance of the discussion comes more to social categories than it does biological, right? Your question about transsexual versus transgender is really important because if there are biological anomalies, then we're having a completely different discussion, right? Because we're not really relating our psychosocial schema anymore to an incongruence in our biology. We're actually just looking at biological indicators for some sort of like anomaly. So that's a slightly different discussion in terms of validity. I would say that's a way healthier way of looking at biological intervention and like puberty blockers and things like that. If there was some sort of biological indicator that justified a puberty blocker, right, then I would actually concede that perhaps that's necessary. But the fact that we're not using biological indicators and we're actually using social norms as an indicator towards biological intervention, that is a red flag. We don't want to start taking scalpels to our social identities, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I also get really confused as to like pragmatically speaking, like what is like when we use okay, so presumably what they want to say is that the distinction between gender and sex is that one refers to your biology and the other refers to like a social role, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the social role presumably is conventional, right? Like what it means to be
Mm-hmm.
social is not personal, it's conventional.
Very good. Like an idiosyncratic usage of a social role seems like somewhat of a, yeah, like a misnomer.
Yeah, and so it just seems okay. So right off the rip, if the majority of people, or if the purpose of a word is to isolate a specific, let's say, image, right, and then there exists this other image that even even if I can't put into words, just intuitively, most people see this thing, and let's say I'm just using thing, not like with a negative connotation, just to avoid using gendered language right now. But they see something and they say, I don't want to identify that as a woman. Like intuitively, this just meets the appearance of what I would call a man, right? Conventionally, if that is the most popular view, and language, the purpose of language is for like harmonious communication, efficient communication on a conventional level, then it appears that um, like this insistence on revising the language to lose its previous meaning in a way that tethers its meaning to something that you mentioned is like epistemically inaccessible to everyone else. That just seems destructive. Like, I don't see how that
Mm-hmm.
can be
Mm-hmm.
justified pragmatically. It definitely can't be justified logically.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. Absolutely. And it circles back to, I love how you use the like epistemic component, right? Because how we approach epistemic uncertainty should be through this. Like, I think logic really does formalize a sense of humility in that approach. Like, the more dogmatic we approach epistemic uncertainty, almost the more our like hubris is evident, like our biases become, even if we're well intended. That's what's ironic here. And so the pattern that I'm seeing that's so like obvious to me is like I said, I give people the benefit of the doubt and I know their hearts are in the right place. I'm not a pessimistic person. I'm really not. I love most people, even when dude, especially when they see things differently than me. Like I'm enamored by and really appreciate people who see things differently than me. Especially if it's like wildly different. Like the more different it is, the more I appreciate it sincerely. Like unless it strays into like I don't know, like scary craziness. Like I'm pretty open minded. So, but that's where the logical component is a different skill set. Like being emotionally available or emotionally intelligent requires a level of epistemic humility. Like you need to remain calm during uncertainty, and although like your knee jerk response might be to be like you want to defend what's right, right? You want to know what's true and defend what's right. And like I get why people are so basically, I don't know, I'm rambling a bit, but I'm trying to like steel man the opposition. I do truly understand where they're coming from, and I'm not trying to like just discredit or neglect that.
Yeah. Um,
Like your
no,
point
like
about
I,
epistemic, their claim to wanting to justify something that's epistemically inaccessible, like that point
mhm.
is really potent, right? Because that's a on. I'm saying that's almost like a good point on their point on their side. It's like it's okay that we have these things that are epistemically uncertain, and to point to them is actually probably a good thing because people are marginalized. But the way we approach these topics does have to be through such like a humble and charitable notion posture, right? Because the more we like, I don't know, the more we like uh vigorously and passionately approach these topics, the more we push people away and like cause the exact thing we don't want to have happen.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, um, I guess like as a pragmatist, my goal is always to just maximize harmonious coexistence, with other moral participants. So if there's something about referring to somebody with some specific language that, increases my ability um, to harmoniously interact with them with no significant cost or relevant cost that I don't want to give up. Um, like rationally speaking, that's fine. But then, oh, sorry, I lost signal. Can you still hear me? There we go.
Yeah, you're
Um,
good. I heard all that.
yeah, but then I'm wondering, is there substantively different between what they're doing, like let's say when they demand that we adopt like some alternative pronoun usage or something like that, and what if I wanted to go by, like, are you familiar with what the royal plural is?
No,
In the royal, you know how like
it's like
kings and
royal.
queens,
How are they
yeah.
addressed? Yeah, how are they addressed? What are you supposed to say?
Well, you treat them as if they're plural, so they usually use pronouns like us, we, stuff like that.
Oh,
Like because
weird.
they were
Okay.
because they refer to themselves not just as a person but as the monarchy, right? They're the
Okay.
representation. And so if
So
I yeah,
they talk of themselves like that, like almost a third person. Is that third person? Us, we.
yeah, and then
Okay.
and then
Okay.
and then obviously so if I want to talk about myself in the royal plural, and then if somebody else talks about me, they have to refer to me as their majesty, right? Like, is that
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
is that
Mm-hmm.
substantively different from what they're doing? Like, if I just
Mm-hmm.
have this psychological condition where it makes me feel better if if the way that I'm addressed is that of the monarchy, like it's my identity. Like, like, is it
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
reasonable?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is where the harmonious component is so like. Yeah. Do you play music at all? Do you play music at all?
I played guitar for like 10 years. I haven't touched it in probably like five. So like, I don't know if I could right now, but yeah, I've played for a long time.
Bro, I kind of relate to you in that sense, and in the sense that like music is this almost distant thing that I appreciate. I love it. It's always been in my life. I love music so much. I play a variety of instruments, but at the same time, I keep them at a distance, and I've never really fell into love with like a group of musicians. I've been in a couple bands, but I've always fallen apart, and there's always this like disconnection in the harmony, not just in the music, but also in the egos and the personalities of the group. You know, making music's hard. It's an art form, and really jiving and jamming and creating harmony together. It's like this vulnerable like thing that's special that you have to find in like simple moments. It's hard to seek. It's a hard thing to seek, and I think it's the same thing with like conversations and relationships. I think that like you have to draw your boundaries at a certain point, but at the same time, like creating music out of nothing, like trying to find the harmony, like a better musician's more capable of that. Like, and a worse musician maybe puts the instrument aside for a while and like not victimizes themselves to it, but like a good musician kind of finds the rhythm and the harmony in anything. So that's what I look up to, and that's what I hope to like be conversationally. But then when I pick up an instrument, I'm frustrated constantly, and it's the same with conversation. Like I don't have the skills to constantly find the harmony, and sometimes I do just have to like, I'm getting a headache. This music's like too much for me. I need to stop, you know? So there's like a fine line there, but yeah, I don't know if that made any sense.
Yeah, no, I do understand, and I agree with you there. And I think maybe partly where the harmony lies actually is almost like ad populum, where we do a survey of what is reasonable, not at an individual level, but at an average level. And this can change from culture to culture, from time to time, just based on the standards of reasonability. And maybe that's where we find the harmony that we're looking for.
I guess I was tempted to approach it more individually. Like when I can find harmony in certain circumstances. If someone's demanding that I call them, like to relate back to your question about the monarchy and being addressed as such, like if I'm in a situation where I feel like the person in front of me wants to call me to call them by a certain name, not because they're like trying to get up one on me, but because they're genuine about it, I'll happily do it. But if I sense that it's a bullying tactic and that I'm the one who's sort of being pushed into a corner, I'll stand my ground. And so that's just part of the harmony of life and conversation. I would do the same in any other setting too, even if they charitably, it's not a name thing, right? They could be called Tom or whatever. It doesn't really matter to me. Instantly, I can see how charitable a person is in a conversational setting. And so all parameters will be adjusted, towards how they're playing their instrument.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting. Let's talk about your second prompt. I mean, I'm not gonna lie. I
Awesome.
haven't I, I haven't had any economy after undergrad, and that's at this point like um, oh God, getting over 10 years ago. I don't remember anything.
Did you
Um,
enjoy economics at all? And like, do you remember anything you learned, or like, what did you take away from it at all?
I took away absolutely nothing, and I'll tell you why. I in college, I was very heavy on let's call it the devil's lettuce, and all the bandwidth I had was focused on my major, which was biochem at the time. And so,
Good for you for
like, it
holding
took
it
every
together
ounce of
through
me.
that, though.
Yeah, it took every ounce of me just to like skate by memorizing certain things. And economics, I literally just like crammed and dumped. You know what I mean? Just cram right before the exam, dump it right after, move on with my life. So
Uh,
I barely remember anything.
Good for you for getting through, man. I went to post secondary, and after like 2.5 years, like I probably 2 semesters away from graduating, I dropped out. Devil's lettuce was a component of that, but also the economics question was a component because I was broker than I'd ever been. I was in debt, and I was victimizing myself to the system of money and the ties of corruption that I obviously saw in education, the institution, and how my credentials were going to be linked to my financial superiority, etc. So when I left post secondary around 24, 23, I hated money and I hated economics, and I was very disinterested in it. I was very skeptical of it. But then around COVID, so this would have been nearly a decade later, almost like maybe 6, 7 years later, I started looking into play to earn video games that were linked to crypto. It was kind of, I don't really know, shot in the dark, just looking at random jobs, found video games. Oh, you can make money on video games. And I started playing one that was like a real world GPS game, kind of like Pokemon Go, but you earn Bitcoin in it. And over the case of a couple
Oh, that's
years,
interesting.
yeah, it was pretty crazy too because it involved being in a Discord, which I'd never had Discord before, and I was in the Discord with the developers, and a lot of the incentives were how you were communicating with the developers and helping them pinpoint real world GPS things in the map to the game, etc. So I was troubleshooting with them, and it felt very involved, and then there was a bit of financial education, financial literacy there, where they were teaching me about how to get a wallet and what Bitcoin was. They're giving me links to like the white paper of Bitcoin and kind of answering my questions. There was a community there as well. It wasn't just the devs. It was mostly the community after a while, right? Of other crypto
Mm.
heads. And I started over a couple years, I racked up 10, 10 grand from this game, but you have to understand that that money was both a result of my efforts in the game and also the increasing value of Bitcoin. So, and on top of that, there would be like
Right.
other there would be other rewards. They would ship me. There would be like a Dogecoin event, and they give you $50 in Dogecoin. But then in a month, that $50 is now worth like $300. So there was shifting markets at play on top of the game that were making me more financially stable than I'd ever been in my life. Like I'd said before, I was just coming out of school and sort of in debt and hating money. And now I was having this transition into, holy shit, maybe money is a good thing. And not only that, when I started moving the money around and seeing that now the real game is not this video game, the real game is now that I have $10,000, what do I do with it? Yeah, I could cash it out and I could spend it and pay my rent. I could put it in a savings account. I could invest it in options. See, it opened all the doors to economics for me. What do I do with money and how can I grow it? Should I invest in myself entrepreneurially? Should I start a business? What are taxes? And like, what is the game of trading? And how do you get into like shorting? More importantly, this is where it gets really deep. Shorting the market, which are you familiar with that term? Have you ever heard of shorting?
Shorting them. I know it's when you like. I know it's when you like. I think shorting is when you leverage on something failing, right, or something like that.
Close. Shorting and leverage is a bit different. Leverage was the next word I was going to say, but shorting is just when you bet against a stock or option. So let's say you want to buy a Google stock. So you buy a stock in Google. Well, that's going long on a Google stock, but you can also short Google stock, which means you could sell it, right? Or you could even open a contract that is the opposite of buying a stock, which is like betting against the stock, which is just a short option. So if the price of the stock goes down, you'll make money rather than the price of the stock going up. Do you understand?
I guess it doesn't make any sense to me. Could you maybe try to explain to me how that works? Because
The leverage
hold on, I have bad
component.
signal.
No, you were good. You maybe have a bit of delay, but the leverage component was kind of important. But let's leave that aside for a second. Just talk about shorting, selling. It's just like selling, right? But you could sell into the future. So a shorting contract is, you might have heard of the word futures, derivatives, options. These are all similar, but what it allows you to do is buy a contract into the future. So rather than selling right now, it's like, think about it like that. Like I'm promising to buy back at a certain point. That's how the contract's set up. It gives you a sell option without you ever having to buy
Oh,
it. Because you're going to buy it back later. That's what they're forcing you to do. It's just a reverse contract, though. There's so much vernacular around this, and every exchange and every like industry has their own sort of vernacular around how these contracts are set up, right? The art of banking is building these contracts and designing them, and there's so much depth to how to build a contract. And crypto, that's really what the crypto space is: smart contracts. It's a way to just formalize protocols on governance, whether it be like corporate governance protocols, making decisions as a team, as a community, and voting, right? Voting powers and how we distribute like voting autonomy in a community. That crypto and money and banking is really linked to our democracy and how we distribute, right? Corporate voting rights and making decisions around a table, a corporate entity of businesses. It's not just political. It's like how we are going to trade and sell and buy back and add supply and all these complex economic questions. They all of a sudden under this metric become interesting to me. I hope I'm enlightening a little bit of a fire under your ass to become interested in economics. And also I hope I'm not like spurging out a little bit in excitement with all this info. I hope that you're collecting some of it.
no. Like I took a very I took a very different route. from what you did. Like instead of recognizing the financial fear, I just kind of like bit the bullet and committed to it. And I completed a very long education. Um, if you count undergrad, I paid tuition for 11 years, and I came out of school with over 200,000 in debt. Um, and I mean, I have a career now that has like a steady salary, but you know how it is. Like with compounding interest, like paying the stuff off is like an uphill battle. Um,
I
yeah,
want,
and I actually have
go
financial
ahead.
advisors my wife and I, we're kind of we're in the same boat where because we both are like terminally trained professionals in a very specific field, and we never bother to look outside of that and learn about things like economics and stocks and stuff like that. What we did do is because we know it's important, we see like the kind of money that exists in it, we just hired financial advisors. And these financial advisors have like a company that they contract with that invests on our behalf. And they pretty much perform on par, if not slightly exceeding the S&P. So that's kind of like what we have going on.
I wanna first say, Sinlith, that your resilience is so admirable, and your tone and your posture is proof of it. For real. I'm not just trying to blow smoke up your ass. I really want you to know that like the financial stress you went through and are like now seeing the horizon of and maintaining your relationship and everything is such a testament to your character. So many would fold, G. So many, it's actually making me tear
Yeah.
up. So many
Well,
would
it might
fold,
also
G.
just be because I was ignorant, right? Like I didn't really, I was too dumb to understand the gravity of the type of crippling debt that I acquired. And I mean, at
Mm.
this point I do, but I kind of took a shortcut, without giving away a little bit too much of myself. I chose to work for the federal government, and after 10 years of service, my loans get forgiven along with the interest. It all just disappears. So I
There you
have
go.
a light at the end of the tunnel and a path
Absolutely.
towards it. It's just that for these next 10 years, I am required to commit to standard payments. And even though I have like, a respectable salary, the amount of money that actually comes home to me in my paycheck after, my loan commitments are removed, I'm still kind of living, I wouldn't say like a college student, but I'm I'm not living anywhere near like what you would expect if you knew like
Hmm.
the kind of the number, the raw number on my salary.
Hmm.
So I don't know. We'll just see what happens, and it's also a little bit scary because Trump is like trying to delete things like student loan forgiveness and stuff like that. He's trying to like enslave all of us. So who
Hmm.
knows?
Hmm.
Who knows where I will end up? I might get trapped. Oh, we'll see.
Okay. Fuck, there's so many avenues here that I want to take this. Like, fuck. You're such a just like genuine person that this conversation is so great. Um, I'm gonna circle it back to number two here. Okay. You can't measure inflation. And I want to talk a little bit about math and ask you about your education in relationship to math. And I think there's a little bit of a relationship. The reason I'm going to ask you the question is because there's a little relationship between our skepticism of math. Like we get through education and we kind of trudge. Some people like math, but for the most part, most of us are kind of like loathing math. And this relationship between money and being financially illiterate. Did you like math through school? Were you kind of like a math head, or how was your relationship with math?
I loved math and all the way until like my last course in college, which was Calc 2. But because of my profession, I am a scientist, like a terminally educated. I have 2 doctorate degrees. I'm a pretty high tier scientist, so I am very versed in statistics specifically, and I think that's probably what this conversation is going to go into if you start talking about um, the value of money, like compounding or disappearing or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Um, Interesting point there. I'm not going to reveal my pushback on that last claim quite yet because I don't want to get too antsy in the conversation. But so do you agree with me that like um, most people loathe the math in school, or math was like one of the
Oh, yeah, yeah, I think so.
right?
Yeah.
And like, so what got you through it? Why were you so? Did you have parents that like kind of encouraged you to do it, or did you have friends? Like, why did you find an interest, even if it ended up post secondary to be statistical math? Like, why did you find interest in it, and how did you get through it?
Well, I think the beginning was positive feedback because really early, like in elementary school, I was most of my peers at it, and so the positive feedback kept going. And then when I started, even when I started falling, I became like average. Like when I was just average at it. Um,
Okay,
I
okay,
still, um, I liked how logical it was. I just found it. I just like the things that have like standard rules and entailments and stuff like that. Lack of ambiguity type of stuff.
yes, okay. So that leads into the point I'm sort of making, which is that I find it very interesting the pattern of dissonance, cognitive dissonance in school between what we think is the truest subject. Like you found a lot of truth in math, like you're saying there, the syllogistic reasoning, even though you didn't know really what logic was, that you saw how sort of, I don't know, how esoterically almost true it is. You believed in math. When you go to art class and gym class, there's not as much rigorous truth behind it as there is in math. Yet the cognitive dissonance is that how could it be that so many people believe in math and think it's so true, and yet we all loathe it? We all loathe it. We don't like math class, right? But it's also something, if you ask people, what subject you hate the most in school? A lot of them are going to say math. What subject do you think is the truest? Math and science. So that's a bit of cognitive dissonance from my perspective. I don't know if you agree with that.
Well, I think that even the people that loathe it are gonna say that it probably is the most structured
Yes, true.
and
Yes,
clear with
yes,
true. Yeah, but I
yes,
think the reason
yes.
they loathe it is probably um, due to like uh, lack of success. You know, not wanting to do other things with their time because math is a skill that requires training and repetition. So you have to
Mm-hmm.
sacrifice other things.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so now I don't even know if I really have to explain myself in terms of this analogy of math. Well, not even it's not even an analogy. It's directly related to financial literacy and how people loathe finance and the truth about finance and the dissonance, the cognitive dissonance between people's values, how they think in terms of dollars, how they value themselves in terms of money and dollars. They think in terms of their freedom of money, and then they hate that system the same way that the truth is defined in math. And they're very their whole moral paradigm and moral environment's defined through the dollar, and they loathe that because of how, well, you put it the best, unsuccessful they are in it.
Yeah. Well, yeah. You are right there, but I think the other thing is there may be a variable here that's kind of going unnoticed in that you're right that you can be very successful in understanding the market and things like that and using it, but the reality is that the world cannot exist if all of us do that, right? Like some of the things on which the market depends on requires the direct labor of people, and so they do have to sacrifice their time to make what you are successful and even possible for you. All of your success is contingent on people using that same time for other purposes to make the values of those companies go up or create opportunities and whatnot. So I think when people hate this stuff, what they're doing is they're saying, look, I find myself in a place where I've had to dedicate my time because the world has been going on for so long and everyone is so specialized at tasks. I've committed so much time to become specialized to make X work. And when I make X work, there's some person who figured out how money works that isn't sitting there using time and sacrificing their body and stuff. They're sitting in front of a computer doing a couple of clicks, making a lot of money off of something that is completely fabricated, and then living a relaxing life much better than mine, and I'm just stuck here. And like you might say, well, you could just learn the skill too and do the same thing, but you see, that's not a tenable option for everyone to take up, because then the thing wouldn't even work in the first place.
Absolutely. Okay, so you brought the conversation to a perfect pinnacle here, because I'm going to relate how we talked about earlier your comment. I'm going to reveal now the reason I wanted to push back on your claim that sort of inflation and the value of the dollar might be related to statistics rather than basic arithmetic. Okay, because most people do get, in terms of school, to basic arithmetic. Most people can multiply. Not everyone's numerically inclined, but especially basic addition and subtraction, maybe not like long division or something, but like I think people get, for the most part, to that point, enough to, ironically, use money, because everyone kind of uses money a bit. But notice that budgeting really, right, is going to be really just addition and subtraction. So there's not really much other arithmetic in terms of a budget necessary when we're going to think about just raw supply and demand and budgeting of how much, right, incoming and outgoing of an input of any commodity or of anything, right? Measuring even a data input. We can just add and subtract the values. There's not really any other action going on in terms of basic economics than that basic arithmetic, just to get things started off to define inflation. Because where I'm going with this is that one of the reasons we become paranoid and skeptical of the greedy button pushers who just understand money and aren't really like supplying labor or producing anything to the market is because the basic addition in our own bank accounts is the math doesn't math. And that's a very frustrating thing because of inflation. When we add and subtract that basic arithmetic that we all know how to do, the dollars in our bank accounts, something doesn't work. And because of our financial literacy, we don't understand why. And we know it's something to do with politics, right? We look to the politicians. There's something to do with greedy, not only we call them stockbrokers or corporate politicians or whatever, label them. Those people who understand finance is how us who are financially literate label it. But really, it's because we don't understand our own numerology again, right? And okay, the reason we can't understand the value of the dollar is because the supply is ultimately is managed by a button pusher, a centrally planned bureaucrat or politician or central banker, right? Dollars are printed at an arbitrary amount. And if you understand basic economics of supply and demand, you understand that the arithmetic of adding up a value is no longer gonna account for if the denominator changes. How are we going to get a ratio of value, right? If we change the denominator, 1 out of $1 million is going to be a different amount than 1 out of $10 million. And when the dollars are distributed and then dollars are printed, this is how the dollar's inflated, simply by supply.
I understand that point, but
okay.
don't you think that like maybe, again, I don't know the definitions of all these things, so I don't know if inflation works with this, but I think that the larger problem is the purchasing power of the dollar, right?
Yep. I'm using the word value, but that's a better term, the purchasing power. Yes.
Yeah, and so I think the problem is when they print this money, how much of the printed money like you said, distributed, like how much of it is in my hands or trickles down to me as opposed to just gets hoarded by somebody else and held in some hypothetical value stock.
But it's not about the hoarding, it's about the printing itself. It's not about the hoarding. It's about the moment more dollars are printed, we've now devalued the currency that's circulating. The purchasing power of it's basic arithmetic. We've now denominated the supply, right, in a way, because the demand of money is infinite, and now we're denominating the supply in terms of a new
Yeah,
number.
yeah, yeah. But yeah, yeah. But here's the thing. Like, how do we? Um, I can't remember this exact chart, but I saw a while ago where somebody showed me like what percent of quote unquote money is actually in circulation, like in the
Mm-hmm.
layman, people who
Mm-hmm.
purchase with it, and what
Mm-hmm.
percent exists in like these hypothetical
Mm-hmm.
stocks, right?
Yeah,
You know,
and
like Apple. Yeah.
I'm in Canada, right? And so, well, to a certain degree, most of that data should be transparent. The supply is the least transparent component of the finance, but like in terms of most regulated markets, but you're right, there are gray areas even in what you're saying there. But most of the distribution and circulating supply is probably the easiest thing to track. It's more like the like produced supply, right? The output of supply. That's the difficult thing. But even auditing the circulating supply is very, very difficult. But you could also then look across the economy. So we're only looking at maybe the US dollar, but then I'm in Canada, so Canadian dollar is a completely different protocol, right? And then think about all the different nations, and then think of the actual economy, because most people think in terms, when they think inflation, they think in terms of prices. So they're looking to a commodity, right? And there's a way of measuring, quote unquote, measuring inflation by using, I don't know if you're familiar with a CPI, Consumer Price Index. Have you ever heard of that?
Yeah, yeah. I
Right.
mean, like I'm like half literate, so yeah, I know what
You
that is.
sound pretty literate. I think you're just being humble. But yeah, so like a basket of commodities, right? So we could look to the price of beef or the price of oil or all these things that increase in price, right? And we say, well, now the purchasing power of the dollar has obviously gone down because oil is more expensive, or a basket of commodities is more expensive. But to the degree that if we're actually trying to be rigorous in measuring the actual purchasing power of the dollar, none of these commodities or a basket of them is going to actually be like sufficient, right? In trying to actually locate where the purchasing power of the dollar even is to begin with, right?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean,
But that's a
the whole
good
thing
thing.
is,
That's a good thing, because that means that it's actually the wild, wild west, and we don't have to victimize ourselves to the dollar, because it's just one option in the plethora of optionality of the free market. The free market allows you to invest and hold assets of any kind that you want. And so being skeptical of the dollar is actually really healthy to the market, because to your kind of issue about hoarding, I wouldn't call it that, but the circulating money, right, is a good thing, because what we should be holding is that we don't want the money shit anyways, so we should encourage people to hold assets and invest in businesses and start companies and actually produce things, right? And that is what it's incentivizing. Basically, a shitty dollar will incentivize that, but the problem is we still need the transactions to be arithmetically. Is that mean like smell? Arithmetically? Arithmetically?
I mean, no, I think
Mathematically?
you might have had it. Yeah, I
uh,
think you had it the first time. I think it is
really?
arithmetically.
Okay.
Yeah,
Arithmetically sound. So the ledger, the balancing books at the end of the day, like when you invest in a commodity or an asset, you want the ledger to be sound. So the dollar is just going to be basically de-incentivized as an investment, and you're going to have to look to other places to grow your assets and wealth. You're going to have to be brave and take a risk on putting what money you do have into things that you are going to speculate on and hope that they grow over time in wealth. If you hold the dollar, mathematically, you will lose. And that is the inevitable frustration of those of us who've been educated into the Keynesian system. We think in terms of dollars, and that's honestly holding us back. If you go to some hillbilly who's out in the country, they got more trucks and toys and property and shit than you do, and you wonder why. And it's because their mind is way beyond dollars. They're thinking in terms of oil and crops and what they got in their freezer and how many bullets they got. And they're not, yeah, they think in terms of dollars, but not really, not as much as us, Crystal Tower types who literally don't have anything except our laptops and shit and a bottle of water. Totally different
Well,
experience.
yeah, but the I don't know, my whole issue with the system, and especially like the reality that we find ourselves in today. When I say hoarding, I just mean the fact that like people who, let's say, like reach these critical thresholds of some minimal supply, such that when they do have, let's say, like a 5% return, that number is so astronomical that they can like sway like much smaller markets, right? And so like just imagine a situation where somebody like, let's just say, like, Peter Thiel or somebody like that, just decides one day, I'm gonna buy the entire world's supply of silicone. Let's just imagine he achieves this.
What was the commodity you said? Silicone?
Yes, silicon. Like he just buys it all, right? And he just completely hijacks like an entire, and this ripples into like all machinery, for example. Like, the ripple effect is huge into vehicles, like cars and stuff like that. Like that kind of power is terrifying to me. Um, and just looking at the kind of numbers and the kind of things, like, have you seen like the islands that the Silicon Tech Bros are like building now? They're like building
Mm-hmm.
like
Mm-hmm.
utopia, like they're calling it utopian islands. I think it's horrific. Like,
Dystopian. Yeah.
yeah. Have you ever seen? This is slightly off topic. Have you ever seen on Netflix? There used to be this show called Altered Carbon.
No.
Oh my god, dude! Do you have Netflix? Or even if you don't have Netflix,
Yeah.
I'm sure you have
Yeah,
access
I'll
to
look into it.
something where you can.
Unforgettable
Dude,
name, Altered Carbon.
dude, the way that they show the divide between the wealthy and the rich, especially if you watch that show to the end, because they start showing you some horrific things, it's so believable. Like the kind of things that they show. Like, just imagine. In fact, you don't even have to imagine too much. Just think about Epstein's Island. Imagine being so rich and bored that you make these types of things a reality. They show way more horrific things in Altered Carbon,
I
but
need
yeah.
to watch this show, but I'm from a very small town, yet my parents, when I was 16, sent me to the most elite private boarding school in Canada. And I was around the most wealthy. It's called Shawnigan Lake School. You can look it up. It was 70 grand a year. My parents are two teachers. They put all their savings into that school. I went there for 3 years, bro. I did get a scholarship in the last year, like partial scholarship for some of my athletics, but that was just high school, bro. High school, bro. And it did get me into UBC. The point about this was I was around the elite of the elite. I was by far, one of the poorest kids at that school, right? Literally, the richest families, not only in Canada, but like from across the world, sent their kids to that school. Now, to the degree that I understand this wealth, I'm not claiming to. I was just a little bit close to it. Yeah, I was close to it. When I went home over the weekend to my friends' houses, I was exposed to an entirely new regime of wealth. And I still am networked with a lot of these people, but not closely because none of them are very genuine. I don't know. Maybe if any of them are listening, maybe you are and reach out to me. What's up, though? But yeah, it's hard to maintain a relationship because most of them are definitely on a whole nother level, not only in real estate, but of well, there's several components here. But like the risk, right, that comes along with a Peter Thiel type. If he were to evacuate and liquidate all of his assets, not only would he like close several companies, sell stocks off, lose jobs for people, but then reinvesting in silicon, right? You are very correct to be like not paranoid, but like somewhat scared, fearful of those realities of his quote unquote power, because he does have the autonomy to like liquidate his assets and invest in whatever he wants, right? And but to a degree that he would be regulated, to the degree he'd be regulated and like restricted and everything, be interesting to see the political weight that would come with that. But on top of that, the competition. The people, what I noticed at this school that I went to is that the reason I can't maintain a lot of the friendships is because the atmosphere is so highly competitive that it ruined a lot of these kids that went to the school. I was like breathing in the flowers and like soaking up the sun and like riding my bike every day, and like I could see the stress that a lot of the kids were under. The expectations that I didn't have a business to inherit. I didn't have, right? I was literally trying to like thinking about whether God existed and like the morality. Like none of my friends really, because they knew that at the end of high school, right, if they were about to inherit like a nation of wealth, and some of them, most of them have flopped it. I've watched a lot of them flop it. So like there's this paranoia around the wealth regime, but then there's also like the upper elite who have to like constantly, basically, if Peter Thiel were to do that, he would be at the mercy of all the other competitive actors who are just gonna like, you know, outsell him, outbargain him, sell him, corrupt his deals in the silicon market, underbid him. Like there is no way, I don't think, to monopolize probably with all the money in the world, the silicon market. In a way, I don't really know much about the silicon industry, but I'm sure that like there are people trying to do that, and like, you know, it's just too competitive of a space, similar to maybe like Bitcoin, or maybe it's a completely different industry or something, but like gold or any good hard commodity asset that people are competing for regulates itself through its scarcity and through the economic factors that like limit human action on the goals and means that they want to outcome in the commodity. We can try to politicize our way out of the conundrum of scarcity, but really the competitive actors, you know, cooperatively acting is the thing that makes me sort of hopeful and optimistic about the economics of things.
Yeah. What about like something like BlackRock?
Again, like it's not that I don't think these harmful entities exist, but I would say that the only hope to like, you know, kill the dinosaurs is to outcompete them economically, not regulate them away or like politicize their way out.
Yeah.
They're a conglomerate of many actors. It's not one person. Yes, we like to anthropomorphize BlackRock into a few elites, but in reality, it's many, many, many people. It's a political organization. It's a massive, like, global entity, and like that's what economics is. So until we start thinking in those terms, you can't really even appreciate like the power and dominance that is truly out there. To be fearful of it is one thing, but like to your earlier point, the ignorance and naivety doesn't get us very far. Like if you want to flourish and you want to live your short life as, you know, meaningful and eudaimoniously as possible, then at least viewing things economically will enrich your sense of wealth. All the things you do have actually, and your ability to speculate and trust your gut, and your ability to make something out of nothing. One man's trash is another man's treasure. Like your knowledge, your education, your skill sets, they're all very, very valuable. And if you do leverage them into the appropriate markets, you will reach financial freedom, I believe. And I'm not there either, right? I'm still getting myself out of the rut as well. So there's a component here that I'm talking to myself as well. I'm not trying to lecture you.
I don't know. I don't interpret it that way. But I thought that, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought the observation was that people are trickling out of the upper class and the middle class is trickling into the lower class. And it seems like the divide, what's actually happening in the world is that people who have all the control of capital are consistently shrinking. The middle class is all but disappearing. And then there's just a growing divide between the shrinking upper class and like just the lower class. Is that not what it is?
Okay, the thing that reveals to me the excitement of economics, Bitcoin. When I think about Bitcoin, I don't know how much you understand about it or anything. I think about how powerful it's made people, the average people. So, in terms of economic wealth, there can be technological innovations that completely uproot the freedom of and autonomy of normal people, and that's what's been happening historically through many innovations, whether it be the printing press, the railroad, oil. Like all of these innovative technologies have freed humanity in many different ways, and the banking sector will also have these implementations. And like so, although the rooting old fashioned traditional ways of things will be cancerous to a certain degree, right? And those, I hope that the vitality of the market will slowly basically quench those off. There will be new issues as well. It will be always a forming, like every evolving thing, but I'm not I'm only hopeful for the opportunities that are ahead because of the wide skepticism of the market. It makes the competition at the low hanging fruit actually very achievable for the average person with a little bit of financial literacy and a little bit of ability to like be entrepreneurial and see the value in things. Like you can easily get yourself out of the situation you're in, you know, whether like trading anything, trading, being economical, like that hustle culture and like flipping things, the flipping culture is really at the root of it. I think the vitality of your own sense of wealth and understanding the wealth in your assets and how much you do have and your own affluence and those kinds of things.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I guess the other concern is that innovation is kind of under the control of the people with the capital. That's like extremely obvious in like if you look at fields like medicine,
Okay,
it's
but
just it costs money to innovate.
let's look at, well, medicine might be a hard one for me to make the case because of how regulated it is, but the naturopathic, I mean, medicine's wide scoping term, so I'll even make the argument with medicine that like the entrepreneurial opportunities in the startup space of medicine's massive. Then even from a naturopathic or like content creator, even just health dietitian, exercise, physical, like all those things, especially pertaining to like aging populations, like specialized dietary and exercise routines, selling courses on that and education on that and or whatever products related to those things, like huge opportunity in the market, and you don't need anyone's permission to do that. And very self-serving, very not self-serving, very like community serving, very like yeah, fulfilling, I would think.
Okay.
So that would be an investment.
Yeah.
So like medicine, you think about like pharmaceuticals and things, highly regulated. But like I'm saying, in terms of like think about health. It's funny that medicine's related to health. Like medicine as an industry isn't really related to like your personal health. It's actually quite disconnected, right? You have all these salesmen trying to sell you the drug that you probably don't need. Personal health is really like a self advocacy thing that you should probably self educate on and take the reins. It does depend on all your choices throughout the day, right? Whether you smoke, what you eat, how much you drink, how much you exercise. And these aren't really political things that some politician can protect you from, your own choices. So it is funny how much our own health is a thing, again, related to the economics of personal choice and time preference and immediacy and incentives, right? It's not really propagandized marketing that just gets us to eat unhealthy. It's also our own negligence, like our own inability to even like care, like all those kinds of things. The fact we neglect it. So like one of the things I find interesting too is like the incentives of gambling. You see that like in an unhealthy inflated market when people are subconsciously skeptical of the dollar and they can't really understand why, but they see the purchasing power of the dollar depreciating, they're more incentivized to gamble. And like throughout history, you can see cultures with more inflated currencies basically were tied to gambling cultures, and like more conservative cultures had a more sound money system. I find that interesting. I don't know. I don't remember where the source of that information came from, so don't. So take that with a grain of salt. But I've learned that somewhere.
Mm,
Because like
yeah.
you can see
Say-
people getting. Go ahead. Sorry, bro.
That's
Oh,
you
you're chopping up.
like every
You're
time
chopping up.
I'm in my office, my
Ah, shit. I can't hear you at all. Sitting with you chopping up. Okay, all good, bro. No, Sage. Not all currency is fiat. Fiat means by decree. Not all currency is by decree. I don't need someone to decree the currency I'm using. Someone else does not need to decree what I use as currency. I have the freedom to choose what I use. Can use anything I want. Yeah, Sinlith, it's been such a good conversation, bro. Um, much love, dog. Much love, bro. It was really enriching. Can't wait to talk to you again, man. Sage, come up and argue with me. Oh, Sinlith, I could talk to you all day. God damn, one of my favorite people. What up, Wesley? Yay.
Hello.
Yeah, man.
What do you mean by arbitrary?
Indigeneity.
Yeah.
Indigeneity. Well, arbitrary. Um, arbitrary would just be, I guess, based on a subjective viewpoint. I came off. I thought you just riffed that, so I don't know if that's true. I could probably find a better definition than that. Do you have one?
I mean, arbitrary would just seem like incidental or accidental.
Okay. Mm, let's see if we can find a better word. I don't mind accidental. I feel like we could define it better though. But do you have a? We can kind of like define it as you go if you want. Like arbitrary, I just feel like a good example. And then this is horrible to use an example as a definition. So maybe I should just look it up, or let me try again. Okay, arbitrary. I try to use my own words rather than look things up, but it's hard. Um, based off a um hmm, I'm gonna look it up.
Okay.
Yeah, it says based on random or personal whim. Do you like that?
I mean, I'm asking you if you like it because I'm the one disagreeing with it. So I just want to clarify
Well,
what I'm
usually
disagreeing with.
one of the things I notice with combative conversations is that people often, I don't know if you notice this, like people often end up disagreeing about semantics and definitions. Do you see that a lot?
Well, no, of course. That's why I want to clarify terms so I can know what I'm disagreeing with.
Yeah,
Because at face value, I disagree with it, but I don't know what specifically I disagree with it
mhm.
as.
Yeah, that's why you're brilliant for, starting there. But that's kind of also why I'm leaving it a little open ended, because I don't want to have a disagreement necessarily about semantics. I want to give some charitability to whatever definition you're using, and we can agree on terms to like clarify things. But I want to make it clear also that I'm not trying to be like authoritative with my definitions.
Yeah. Well, it's just a
If that
start.
makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. I don't want to stall out either, because a lot of these arguments do stall on some like very arbitrary things that I would consider arbitrary, right? But I would say that it's like intersubjective, and like subjectivity has justifications, right? So that's why I disagree with it. Like the justification for like being a part of a certain indigenous tribe or a specific, like a lot of these things are flexible, but like I wouldn't call them arbitrary, because there is like an initiation, which is like it is subjective, but like that comes with like justification and participation in some social group.
But in terms of indigeneity, the like simpliciter, the term is arbitrary. We could look at a specific example of indigeneity and look at the non-arbitrary qualifications in order to, categorize yourself as such. But simpliciter, the overall term indigeneity, doesn't seem to have any like necessary or sufficient terms that condition it. Seems highly arbitrary and just based off of, like you kind of said, like intersubjective, which I don't know what the difference between that and subjective is, but it just seems based on like something, sort of random or based off personal whim.
Well, like something like that's like an example of intersubjective is like religion or law, right? In which that you have like a shared subjective space, and like within that subjectivity, there are like there's like logic and there's like rules.
Okay.
But overall, it is still subjective because it's still dependent on minds. But those minds, have come to a consensus.
Yeah.
Or practice.
The consensus in terms of indigeneity is really unclear for me. Like I'd be happy to hear like there are different ones, but they all seem vague. Like that's kind of where it's like highly arbitrary almost.
Well, it's dependent on what kind of social group you're born into, right? So like like the term indigenous or really comes like people like First Nation people. So like like when colonialists come to a particular
pre-colonial, yeah.
It's pre-colonial indigenous, like pre-colonial societies, right, that were there before colonization.
So under that definition, no one today could be indigenous, right? Because no one today existed in pre-colonial times.
There's always like exceptions to the rule, right? And there are still, and I wouldn't necessarily disagree, because like now we have like things like nationality. So like the way in which we organize societies are different from how previous cultures did incorporate themselves into society. So I think it is antiquated it doesn't need to apply to everyone.
No, yeah. So, but just to be clear, like under that definition, no one could be indigenous today, right? Because in order to be indigenous, you have to exist. Or is it the existing before pre-colonial times that renders you indigenous?
No, I would say
person?
any ethnic group that predates colonialism still exists today in some fashion, right? And they're like so like those tribal traditions still exist, right? And they still incorporate members into them. So like I would say, I would argue that there is still indigenous groups, and like you could be indigenous depending on what indigenous group you're subscribing to, if they accept you or not.
Okay, so like Sage in the comments says it's related to ancestry, right? You have to have an ancestor from that pre-colonial group, but like I want to make sure I'm understanding your point clearly. Like you're also kind of including someone who just upholds the norms and traditions, right? Like if even someone who ancestrally wasn't necessarily indigenous incorporated themselves into the culture, they could be rendered as indigenous at some point.
Yeah, it depends on what kind of indigenous group you're talking about, because like blood quantum is like a very racist idea in which that it's based on ancestry. Although obviously like people born into a society are going to inherit it inherently, so to speak. but also like these tribal groups do have traditions in which that have a sense of being being naturalized into that society. So it does depend on what kind of society you are entering. Like it's different. That's why it's subjective, because it does vary. But I wouldn't say it's
Hmm.
completely arbitrary, because each group has its own justifications for it.
Well, but if each group has its own justifications, that does mean it's arbitrary. I see what you're trying to say, though. Like the qualifications themselves in each ancestry or tradition or indigeneity may not be arbitrary.
So I feel like you're just treating arbitrary as subjective. And like I don't think subjective and arbitrary are the same word.
What about random or like just random?
Yeah, this random also isn't the same thing as subjective. Random is like randomness is like theoretical. We don't even know if randomness actually occurs naturally.
Yeah. So, but now we're having kind of a semantic dispute again. I'm open to using a clarifying term here that would get the definition more. So I don't need to. I don't know what one you'd rather use. So you seem to have issues with both subjectivity and randomness, but you like
Well, no,
intersubjectivity.
no, it's just that like subjectivity does not mean random, and subjectivity does not mean
I
arbitrary.
agree. I agree.
And so like if you were to say that indigeneity is subjective, I would agree with you. But like when you say it is arbitrary, it sounds as if it's like of no consequence and of no substance. Like it's just kind of a like it's like what are you identifying as if it's arbitrary? So like not like your identity becomes arbitrary. If you wish to identify as something that's indigenous, that identification in itself is arbitrary, and like you, in some sense, you've diluted your own identity by classifying it as such.
Well, my own identity is arbitrary.
I mean, like I can't tell you how you shouldn't and should not identify. But when it comes to like saying, if I were to say that this person's identity is arbitrary, I would be concerned with well-being. Like if if it is incidental, like that may be grounds. There's like an implication for like some kind of violation.
Okay. I was gonna use an example earlier, and then I hesitated in the definition, but I think maybe the example would be potent now. Well, for some reason, the example of arbitrary for me produces this example of like a metric system, like metric versus imperial measurement. So you and I want to measure the length of, a piece of wood we're going to cut. It doesn't really matter which system. Both are accurate, right? We could use millimeters and centimeters, or we could use inches and feet. Both are going to get the job done. They're equally as true or valid systems of measurement, but which one we select because of that, because of the fact that they're both equally true, our selection method becomes arbitrary onto which one we want to select. Do you kind of agree with the usage of arbitrary there in that example?
Yeah, if we're like if we're disagreeing on like are we using Fahrenheit or Celsius to measure temperature, that is arbitrary because it's
So
you
like
can
whether
balance
it's
out the equation.
maybe it's not subjective or random, but like I think random is kind of a good word to maybe clarify the usage here because like for all I care, if you and I were building a house together, we could just randomly choose. I don't have any. I mean, if it's truly arbitrary, truly in terms of like everything else equal, then I don't mind calling it random which one we choose. Like what or my if I say it's my preference, that's one thing, right? I prefer we go with metric for imperial, but it's going to be really hard to justify that preference because it seems like a biased irrational preference if they're both equally truth app. It'd be like having a foreman on site, right, who insists that the inches are better than centimeters somehow. It's like, okay, the foreman's just an idiot. You can't concede that these are both equally as maybe he wants us all to use the metric system. Fine, we'll use the metric system. But he over coffee has to laugh it off and say, we could just be using the imperial system. If he literally tries to defend with his honor the metric system, like he's laughable, right? You wouldn't take him seriously.
No, like in that respect, I mean, it does become like a semantical argument then, and I guess we just are going to agree.
So like, I hope that I haven't like backed you too far into a corner in terms of what this looks like analogously to the indigeneity claim. But like at the end there, I got kind of ruthless with claims of honor and things. I mean, and how extending randomness to a foreman over coffee is like basically being analogous to some like indigenous chief claiming property rights over land because of their ancestral blood lineage. But although you already did concede a bit of the blood lineage ridiculousness, so I appreciate that consistency.
No, and you did raise a concern that I was just thinking about, because obviously it's not 100. No analogy is going to be perfect, obviously, and that is my concern with using the word arbitrary, because we can just look at some tribal or indigenous group and be like, it's arbitrary, incidental, accidental, it's not necessary, right? And this becomes a grounds for justification for like removal.
Like removal in what way? Removal of what? A person's identity or something?
Removal from identity, removal from land.
Yeah, identity, no. Land, yeah, that's a big one. Not, I didn't mean yeah, as in like I agree with people being removed from land. I just mean disputes over land shouldn't really be over indigeneity. Should have nothing to do with land disputes, right? Because ancestral blood lineage, as we've kind of already suggested, is like a toxic way of giving people like property rights. It seems barbaric.
I'm a little confused. Like property rights. So are you completely an aboriginal when it comes to owning land?
No, I like property ownership, just not based on indigeneity. I like the free open market and right, like private property, like being able to trade property openly. I don't
Okay,
like the
I mean,
idea.
I mean, my issue with this is like it feels a little contradictory because like in order for there to be a free marketplace, you must be willing to sell your goods, right? You cannot be forced to sell your goods.
Very
So if
true. Very true. The consent factor is yes,
so if there's like
necessary.
if there's an indigenous tribe in which that is correlated with some kind of land and they do not wish to sell their land, but they're being imposed to sell, that becomes an issue.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right.
Obviously, there's so like I'm giving you a charitable intuition pump there. Like I will concede all of that and agree with you with all of that. I hope that you see what I'm going to say next not as like a counter argument, but more of just an extension maybe of what you're saying. It's also
Mhm.
complex because the history of free market economics was under development during pre-colonial and colonial times. There hadn't really private property laws had not been established yet. So although I agree that anything unethical that looks anything like, theft and violence, I am not down with. So you don't have to, clarify that any further. But I think in terms of treaties and contractual agreements and language barriers, there's very much a benefit of the doubt issue that we don't give to our ancestors in terms of the product, the progress they did make rather than being so skeptical of the agreements. Although I'm sure, like, so there's both sides of the coin. It's like, there's no doubt as much corruption, theft, and violence as there is, or maybe more so that as there is actual fair trade going on. No doubt, bro. And all that trauma is going to extend futures into our lineage. Like we're not going to be able to sort it out in one generation. You know? Totally agree. But I think that the only way to sort it out is to extend something like birthrights and private property laws into our children's birthright rather than trying to make them salvage through their ancestry and blood lineage to try to delineate who has like ancestral rights over the land or something like that. I think there's a more ethical way of doing it, which it does look more like consensual, open, open free trade and private property laws.
I mean, I think the issue is that these indigenous groups are there's like a supply and demand issue, right? And in which that there is, I don't want to use, that's probably a little too pejorative, in which like they don't have enough ancestral land amongst each other to share, right? Because their territory has been limited to such an extent in which now they're competing in which to live on ancestral land, right? And especially when there's like a legal issue with this as well, where the law on some tribal lands or reservations is different from that of like the state or the federal government. Or like, I know you're Canadian, right? Maybe province is a better term for that. So like these indigenous people want to participate with the legal benefit that they get when they live on that land, but there is only so much land that they can participate with, right? So like it is, a lot of indigenous people are being excluded from those legal benefits.
Okay, so
Actually competitive.
I definitely have some sympathy for that, but it's hard for me to reconcile the sympathy with that notion alongside of my love for like immigration and the nomadic reality of being a human. Like, yes, preserving certain ancestral cultures is important, but that alongside like multiculturalism and global diversity, it's like those things don't really go hand in hand. So I can't really reconcile those things in my heart, although I want my cake and to eat it too as well. But like the fact that we are nomadic and I'm in Canada as a result of a third generation, European movement over to Canada, well, I could just as fairly move back to another area where indigeneity is being affected and colonize that area the same way an Aboriginal person here in Canada could. They have the freedoms to, so like two Indigenous people here in Canada could save up money and go to Europe and start living where like in the scarce land that is there or anywhere else on the planet that's being run basically like populated through immigration and just nomadicism.
I mean, I think like nomadic is like a very like technical term, right? Which I don't think necessarily can be applied to like all forms of immigration, because like nomadic peoples, they roam a particular area, right? They're not, and they go back and forth. Like there's a repetition to like where they go. They don't just like go somewhere.
That's fair. Do you have a better term that would describe sort of the movement of cultures today? What is a better term than nomadicism? Because I'll give that credence.
No, I think that you're like overall correct. Like human immigration is something that is natural, right? Human being, like Native Americans got to America by migrating there, right? Over land bridges or, sailing over boats.
Maybe just migrative is the better word. Yeah.
Like migration is like perfectly like, maybe a little more appropriate than nomadicism, but at the same time, it's like there is not an expectation for someone to participate in, like this constant shuffling about, as if like this is like the preference that you should move.
No, but I'm saying I appreciate both sides of the coin and I don't know how to reconcile them. I like the idea of live and let people do what they want. If people want to move around, let them. If they want to stay and appreciate traditional values, let them. But then that seems to cause global conflict everywhere over property rights, no matter where I look.
Well,
I don't even really have a dog in the fight. I have no property and I have no religious ties, and I'm basically ethnically cleansed and whitewashed and have no indigeneity to anywhere, apparently. So I'm just like a side observer calling it how it is, man. Just calling balls and strikes.
Well, I think the issue with this is like it is a colonial capitalistic one in which they're like, Indian means Indios, people in God, right? Because they were so nice. Like they were very welcoming and hospitable to the Europeans that came over here, right? And they were excited for like this new human diversity. The issue then becomes like their guests, just exploited them. And I think this is like the issue that I'm probably having with like the arbitrary kind of distinction in which that like there is like an entitlement for participation in one system. And like that's like, and it also becomes like an economic problem later, because if you are not, you are expected to be financially literate, you're expected to financially participate in such a fashion in order to live a decent life. But if you lack that ability, you're not going to be able to live a decent life. So like it's this constant imposition of like you must participate in something.
Yeah, it's a dominant um, phenomenon, economics. Yeah.
I just
You can't really sweep it under the rug. You can't really run from it. You're immersed in it, whether you like it or not. You could neglect it, but you're going to be a victim of it if that's the case.
well, it sounds like you have like some like identity crisis, and I'm curious about that.
Okay. In terms of like indigeneity, or in terms of what?
Well, it seems that you have a preference in order to be able to identify as an indigenous person.
Oh no, I don't care. Like I said, I already I just think. Wait, what makes you think that? No, I'm pretty detached from these terms, bro. I really don't care.
So, like, how would you identify yourself then?
To like you, just logic, Joel. I don't
Logic.
know. Like if I identified myself to my friends or like a person on the street, I'd probably use my actual name. I don't know. Like I identify myself to myself in a very like that's basically an impossible question to even answer. You know, like I don't know what you expect from me here.
Well, like for example, like you're Canadian, right? I'm American. I would identify myself as a constitutionalist, right?
Okay. Okay.
I would identify myself as like a patriot in like I know that patriot's a bit of a loaded word, but patriot in the terms of being a constitutionalist. Um, I like as a citizen, as someone who believes in democracy, right? Those are all like identities and like cultural touchstones in which I affiliate myself with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in terms of what I affiliate myself with, like philosophically and things like and identify with, like you might be right that to scoff a little bit at my first identify there, like, but logic troll really is, I think, where my heart is at. Like, I really am that at heart. I like seeing how genuine people are, and I don't really identify with any category necessarily. Like, I'd like to think that even locked in a room with someone who doesn't speak the same language as me or that is deaf, that I'd really be able to like patiently and curiously like learn from them and relate to them and like live with them and peacefully. So like I kind of just navigate through that lens, which might be a bit of identity crisis to be charitable to your criticism a little bit, although it seems to empower me. So I mean, I seem to be empowered through like epistemic humility, and to the degree that I maintain emotional stability and those kinds of things, and I remain rational. That's kind of my focus. Literally, I try to just identify with like the logos or like logic. That's like my biggest identifier.
Well, the thing that like raised my eyebrows is when you said that you were whitewashed, which sounded like it came from like it sounded like a pejorative.
That
Like,
was the troll side of me. That was the troll side of me, to see sort of how genuine you are. So you seem very genuine, actually. The fact that you picked up on that. I don't really view myself as whitewashed. That's kind of just a troll to see, where you're kind of at with the terms. And like I understand that most people do view me as that, so it's not me being pejorative to myself. It's just like this ain't my first rodeo.
well, like whitewashed is something in which it's like imposed onto something, right? You whitewash something, right?
Yeah,
It's not. It's
that's
not
right.
like it's not something like you. It's like a consent thing. So it's like, is it like white guilt?
Well, that would be me like seeming as though I do have white guilt. Yeah, but I don't. I'm trolling. I don't have white guilt at all. That's the claim to indigeneity, right? If I had white guilt, I wouldn't have the balls to bring up the fact that like the term is arbitrary, or at least I have a claim to indigeneity. I'm equally as indigenous or native to the land I was born in as anyone else, regardless of ancestry.
Well,
So that
that's
doesn't.
but that's like trivially true in the sense that we are all indigenous to Earth. right?
Right.
Unless you
Totally.
believe there's lizard people somewhere.
No, totally. You're spot on. You're spot on.
But
So
like at
that's
the
not
same,
an identity crisis. That seems like very like enlightened.
I mean, like I do think it kind of like there, but at the same time, like that's like a global definition in which that like lacks specificity because like there are things like jurisdictions and like regions, right? And we can like be more fine detailed on what we mean by indigeneity.
Absolutely. So we could talk about how like where I'm born, where I'm native to, or we could talk about my like ancestral lineage, what parts of the world that I could go back to and like reach into my cultural background for. We could talk about where what my kids would be and like the future generations. We could address it all. It doesn't really matter to me. But in
Well,
the term is still arbitrary, which you kind of already agreed with.
well, it. I mean, like arbitrary so much. There is like political motivation for like defining these terms. So like it, like words.
That's definitely true.
So like politically, these terms are like I would say are incorrect because there's motivation in which that would disagree with like how we are defining it, right? As a means of like preserving it. But like now we're just like talking about like the intentionality of cultural groups and wishing to define these terms a particular way. And so like my criticism is like are you defining these terms for your own political motivations, right? As much as another person might.
Oops. Usually I'm kind of leveraging an internal critique. That's why I'm kind of like open to the definitional avenues that people want to go down because like I'm willing to be rational and see both sides of the coin. I could really play devil's advocate and defend either position. But if I were to say my own stance on the terms, I'd probably just adopt a cultural like normative definition.
I mean, but the issue with like normative definitions, like whose normative definitions are we using?
Yeah, of
Like,
course.
are you using a
But
Western
there's no way
normative?
to escape that. Well, you want to know mine specifically? Like, I don't really know. No, in terms of indigeneity being arbitrary, I'm using like a ancestral definition, traditional ancestral definition here.
Yeah, but again, the issue with that is like when you say traditional or ancestral, that is also arbitrary. You know, using your own words in the
Thank
sense
you.
is like, so like we're using our,
Exactly.
there's like infinite regress. There's an infinite regress problem
You're
in
proving
which
my
like,
point for me, bro.
I mean, this is why I use intersubjective, right? Because we can then step into an internal critique, but I can't step into a internal critique if everything is arbitrary because
Well,
everything.
that's exactly the point. It's exactly the point. I can't internally critique someone who's leveraging a traditional ancestral claim to indigeneity because, yeah, it's it's vacuous or what was the claim you use? What was the word you use?
Ambiguous.
Yeah, ambiguous. Sure, ambiguous is probably better than arbitrary. Should probably change the term. Should probably change the word to ambiguous. It's a better word.
I mean, but like this ambiguity feels like abstracted in a way that's imposed. Like it's not necessary for it to be ambiguous. Like obviously, if we want to be nihilists, right, and everything lacks meaning, then like then we're just gonna divest in whatever kind of
Well,
subjective space they.
I could appropriate a definition that isn't ambiguous that would work. That so because it would still be arbitrary, but it wouldn't be ambiguous, which would be birthright. So indigeneity, just not bloodline, not ancestry, but it literally just links to where you are born. Someone is indigenous to my children will be indigenous to where they're born. Right now I'm in Canada. If I move to anywhere on the planet and I have a kid there, they're indigenous to there. I'm not saying that works in the culture. I'm not saying that works like normatively, that definition, right? But I'm also and I'm not saying that normatively means norm or something. I understand the word also comes with like moral baggage, the normativity. I understand that term, but yeah, you can see how that's not ambiguous.
Well, no, it's like obviously like it would be the case if everyone agrees that we can all get along. And like we need to bridge the gap and like why is it that there are different metrics of
But
measurement?
okay, but bro, I'm trying to say specifically that the blood lineage claim, the claim, and I'm not saying you claim this, but I'm saying that a lot of people do. The claim that your indigeneity is claimed to blood lineage and your ancestry tied to pre-colonial history, that is ambiguous. There's no way to show the where who would be indigenous and who isn't under those metrics.
And most indigenous people would agree with you. Like
Right.
these talking points I've gotten from indigenous people who say blood quantum is bullshit.
Thank you for saying that. Because me too. That's where I'm getting this from too. Because talk about white guilt, people who defend the shit and don't even know where the truth comes from. Because absolutely, bro.
And because like you're talking about like there's different types of citizenship in which one is blood quantum and one is like if you're born there. And the United States is like one of the few countries in which that has it where if you're born here you are American citizen. I don't know if Canada is the same way.
Yeah, it is.
But what motivated that, right, is like post enlightenment kind of thinking of governance, right, in which they wanted to like disenfranchise themselves away from a tradition in which that was based on like nobility and like dynasties, in which that you being born is sufficient enough for you to be incorporated into a society, right? But again, we have to ask ourselves, why is it that there are, like, what are the motivations that cause people to disagree? And like these things are like political.
Yeah, well, there's a lot, right? But this is kind of where I go to the economics of things because it seems like mutually benefiting, like mutually cooperative distribution of wealth and labor is the only way really to like seek an incentive to sort out our disagreements. Otherwise, I don't know why we wouldn't just be violent. Like violence seems like the only alternative in nature compared to like the miracle of trade where one man's trash is another man's treasure and we can both mutually benefit from that fact. Like trading is I think the most like progressive aspect of humanity that we could study. The fact that that people will trade goods even amongst their differences, even amongst their language barriers, even amongst their cultural differences, even amongst their land disputes, that somehow a small percentage of those things have yielded actual cooperative trade. What a miracle.
I wouldn't say trade is identical or synonymous with equal distribution.
Not equal. I didn't say equal. I said
Well, like,
I said mutual. I said mutual, right? Consent. So the consent is a really important part. And I already did concede that any, theft or anything or violence is not what I'm talking about.
well, no, it's just because it sounded almost like, are you socialist or communistic?
No, capitalist.
Okay, a capitalist.
Yeah, like trade, free open trade.
All right, so
yeah.
you don't think there is any issue with like monopolies?
Definitely issues. I don't know if they're part of free open trade. They could be an issue of like they could be sort of a symptom of it, right? Emergent, but I do have an issue of it. Like basically once a monopoly emerges, I don't think that there is an open free market anymore. The whole concept is that they restrict the market. So I'm not for monopolies, although there may be some good arguments for defending certain limited cases of monopolies, like a monopoly over violence to keep like a police society. I could be maybe convinced of like an argument like that. That does seem good.
I mean, even like those kind of monopolies aren't true monopolies in a sense because like it still has like public participation in it, right? If we're in a democratic society, right? Those people in which that has a means to violence is like to like the public good, right? So like that's not even like like a true monopoly is just there for profit, while the monopoly over violence is there for stability. Like the monopoly over violence isn't for profit, right? There, we don't have a monopoly over violence so we can profit the most of it. We have a monopoly over violence so we can mitigate against violence itself. So like when we're talking about like true monopolies, we're talking about institutions whose sole concern is profit.
Yeah, I would think that a monopoly over violence would be highly profitable, and that's why the military complex is linked to money, but right, and territorial oppression and land control and occupation and things like that. Like I would say, it's the fundamental monopoly. Like if you don't have a monopoly over violence, then like that's the crucial and fundamental one that preserves whether or not you're in a tyrannical regime or a peaceful one. So you're right that there's like, depending on who's instituting the monopoly, it's going to be a very different society. But I'm saying that like it's inevitable. Why would you call yourself like an anarchist or something? Like I don't know how the emergent like hierarchy of violent oppression seems like natural. I don't know
Well,
how like
well, natural does it like we have ideals and aspirations, right? We have goals, right? We don't have to like resign ourselves to like eating poison ivy because it's natural,
yeah.
right?
So actually, yeah. So I would concede that the monopoly over violence isn't necessary. I just said that maybe I could be talked into it, but you're like I've heard defenses of it that seem appealing, but overall, I'd probably stand my ground and say I'm not in favor of monopolies.
Well,
I just kind of try to give an intuition pump towards that, I guess.
well, I guess like I'm talking about ideals because obviously people are profiting off of violence, but like a true monopoly is only concerned with profit, right? Um,
I agree, but don't you agree that violence, like one, so therefore they might want to include violence in what they like control because
yeah, well, like
right.
whatever kind of like marketplace we're discussing, right? The monopoly over violence, as an example, is really is not the marketplace. It's not like the people within the marketplace. It is like the marketplace itself, in which that a market can take place, right? Because a true marketplace
Okay.
cannot take place if like no honor among thieves kind of
Yeah,
vibe,
yeah.
right?
So to steel man what you're saying, it's kind of because like I'm using the term violence. Like if I were to say a monopoly on guns, that would make more sense. But violence is this sort of esoteric term that's out there, uh, pertaining to individual actors, etc. That no one really. You're saying it's kind of a fallible claim because no one could really ever monopolize violence. An individual actor could always just institute their own notion of violence on another person, regardless of this quote unquote monopoly, and there would be no profit necessarily coming from it.
Well, no, it's like more like imagine Walmart going to war with Amazon. Like not like a financial. They're trying to like compete each other in the marketplace. They literally just buy tanks and hire soldiers to attack each other's warehouses, right? And to destabilize their competition that way, right? So like when the government is like monopolizing power, essentially what's happening is like the government saying you cannot attack your competitor. Like you can outcompete them within the rules we give you, right? But you cannot behave as like an independent feudal lord in which that's going to wage war with your financial competitor.
Yes, absolutely.
So like the monopoly of violence is what allows a free marketplace because otherwise we would just be in a state of war in which we have feudal like then we just have like warlords, right? Any billionaire, right, would be essentially a warlord with the means of like
Yeah, I
acting at.
agree, but I was trying to sort of steel man your point of view that like the monopoly isn't really true because they're not really a profit seeking entity to the degree that they're producing violence.
I mean, I think they're profit seeking this in the absence of violence, right? Like the reason why the government has a monopoly over violence is because then by removing that capability away from individuals or institutions, right, it makes a safer environment for an economy to emerge.
No, I agree. I agree.
So like in a sense, like they're gonna like the whoever has a monopoly on the violence is going to profit one way or another, right? You know, taxation is theft if you want to be a libertarian about it. But fundamentally, it is setting up a foundation in which that allows a marketplace, what we would consider a free marketplace, to emerge from. But like that's my issue with capitalism. Ultimately, is that monopoly has too much. Monopolies have too much political power, in which that leverages against the state, in which that erodes at like the democratic process. Right, and eventually it's going to be like death by 1,000 cuts, in which monopolies will fundamentally bring any capitalist society that declares themselves as democratic is going to become authoritarian.
So, but wait, other than the military having a monopoly over violence, which you already said is necessary for a healthy economy, what other monopolies would you point to give an example of this like toxic aspect of a monopoly?
Well, like I think that like people have a right to profit, but they don't have the right to profit for on everything.
But do you
Right.
is there another example of a monopoly that I'm just trying to think of one like what you're
So like
thinking
I
of,
guess
'cause-
like I'm here in the United States, right? You're Canadian, you guys have like nationalized healthcare, right? But we don't have that, right? Like there are monopolies in which that run healthcare. There are monopolies in which that run grocery store. Like a lot of monopolies run farms as well. Like there's lots of big corporate farms in which that put small farmers out of business, right? In
but
which
that's a
like,
bit. There's a big difference between that and a true monopoly. I'm trying to like. Is there a well-known monopoly that's out there? Like for me, the U.S. military seems like the most obvious one. Like maybe the federal bank would be the next one. Like, but then beyond that, I don't. I mean, they have. So I hear your concerns with like agriculture and stuff, but I don't know if there's any like true monopolies in that sense.
well, if you're like, I mean, I guess my issue with this is like, is it the ultimate monopoly? Like monopolies don't need to be the ultimate one in order to have like there are little monopolies, so to speak, right? In which that use bad business practices in which to exploit the market for their benefit unfairly, right?
I'm trying to see how this is a problem for capitalism, though, because capitalism is the institution of like open free trade that doesn't include monopolies. So like you're kind of trying to include this toxic symptom of like humanity into capitalism.
No, but I mean, like the issue is like the goal of companies is profit, right? That is their fundamental. They're not a company if they're not interested in profit, and so like their motivations aren't necessarily to follow the rules, right? Because it becomes a cost of doing business in which they just have to pay a fine, right? We're not dissolving companies every time they have bad business practices. We just slap them with a fine. Right, those fines essentially just become taxes in which to break the rules. Like you can break this rule, you just have to pay this tax, right? In which like no company is truly held responsible for their bad business practices. And healthcare in the United States is a good example of this, in which that you have like nursing home facilities in which there is bad business practices occurring, in which that elderly people are suffering from. But because those corporations aren't held criminally responsible in any meaningful sense, right, they can just continue that practice of abuse and neglect with their bad business practices.
So,
And if the state calls them out on it, they pay like a $500,000 fine, but they already made $1 million that year. So, all right, I made $500,000.
I'm still not seeing. I see this as like criticisms of like human greed, criticisms of like just human, like the human. I don't know. Human.
It's a criticism of the.
Why is it
right,
capitalism specifically, which
a
would
criticism.
I'm defining as like open free trade that isn't coerced?
it's a criticism of regulation, right? Because in order to have a fair, free marketplace, you need to have regulation. It's not a free marketplace if you don't have regulation.
Well, it's somewhat circular because the democratic institution that you want to uphold, like the regulatory body, is also just a competitive free market race. You can't really escape like the natural wild west of things, and your attempts at regulating reality are always going to be futile. Human greed and corruption and exploitation, we can like I appreciate the ambitious like notion towards an idealistic law system that prevents all these things, but obviously that's like utopian and
I mean,
ultimately tyrannical, because we have to let some of the margins slip through. We have to let people have their freedoms, and that comes with a level of risk. We cannot insulate people from themselves. That's just the reality of like humanity.
but at the same time, like then you're just kind of conceding to might makes right kind of philosophy, and like people.
No, because the market is a specific system of consensual mutual trade. It's not violent. It's not pertaining to any coercion. Exploitation is the word you use, but as soon as there's any kind of exploitation, if you're saying just profit seeking is inherently exploitative, then you're not giving credence to the basics of trade, which is mutually beneficial and mutually profitable. Like, yes, I hear your criticisms and critiques, but what you're not doing is steel manning the benefits of what open free trade actually is, which is mutually beneficial exchange of goods where both parties profit.
Yeah, but
So profit is not inherently exploitative.
well, I guess like I am giving that marketplaces in essentially like some aspects of capitalism is going to be natural, right? It's going to be even in like an absolutely communistic
Because
society.
well,
Still
just because
going
of
to be
profit.
there's still going to be some kind of capitalistic aspect to it, right? There's still going to be trade. There's still going to be exchange of goods, but like the issue becomes that like this idea that like it just seems like those arguments that you've made, people have made about slavery, right? It just we're just assuming the status quo is the way it is, and therefore it's always going to be like that, instead of like being motivated or inspired to like spur up change. Because like,
You're attacking a straw man at that point. You're so attacking a straw man because I'm including consent, non-coercion, and non-exploitation in my definition of free trade. So how did we get to slavery?
no, because like fundamentally, like using my nursing home example, is like those people are not motivated to provide care, they're motivated for profit. And so like profit takes
Well, you're
precedent over
claiming that.
well-being.
You're claiming that. But now you have to steel man my position, which is that if the exchange is actually consensual, for instance, when I find a home for my aging parents, I would hope that it wouldn't be that case, and that I would be a good judge of that. So I could probably determine for myself, thank you very much, how coercive and how actually, helpful the services are, and why I'm paying for
I
them,
mean,
and the condition of my elderly parents, etc.
the issue about this is like then you're priced out of an ethical nursing home, or you're priced out of an
That's a
ethical
massive assumption
marketplace.
too. That's a massive assumption.
No,
But I know prices
no,
are high, but you don't. You're
the
just. I don't know
assumption.
why you'd claim that about me in my particular case, but like you
No,
could
I'm
make
not.
that, I guess.
This isn't a personal. Like this is just we're talking about individuals, right? There are going to be individuals in which that are able to afford a nice nursing home, and there's individuals who cannot afford a nice
That's
nursing home.
right. That's right.
And are we really going to punish an individual who can't afford a nice nursing
Well,
home?
who's punishing anyone? No one's entitled to luxurious nursing homes in their old age. In fact, no one's entitled to old age.
Okay, I think that's a bit of a straw man in itself. We're not talking about luxuries, we're talking about quality of care. And if
You're talking
quality
about
of care is a
entitlements. You're
luxury, that's a
talking
little
about
different.
legal entitlements and regulating the market to distribute the wealth in areas that you're arbitrarily assigning value to. But like
I'm not
I
saying
don't
someone.
agree that I don't personally agree that I want the government coming in and regulating old folks' homes. I think that the private market would do just a fine job, and I'd rather see for myself the products and services that are out there. And honestly, it's like most countries don't have a good elderly care social system, and in those countries, it's more the norm to take care of your elderly parents, or they age and die. So no one's entitled. I don't understand why any of this is like an entitlement or what you're really trying to justify or fight for. Because like the reality of the situation, you can be leaning towards your good intentions, and I hear you, but your best bet to like help and inform like old aging people would be to like start a business and supply a service, not try to politically activate some sort of regulation on the market that's only going to, for the most part, hold people back who are trying to do the very thing that I just suggested you do.
I mean, but at the same time, start a business sounds like scratch off a lottery ticket, in which that like just because you start a business does not entitle you to profit or success in that business. And what happens when that business fails? Well, your business fails, I guess, survival of the fittest, die in a ditch.
You want the survival of the fittest in terms of elderly care. That was your whole claim. You wouldn't want a
No.
half-ass laissez person who's only in it for the profit to take care of older people. You would want the free market choices of consensual market determiners and autonomous reasoners to actually set the price of those things, because they'll tell you, this is a great institution for my parents. They're well taken care of. It's reasonably priced. I don't mind paying. They were saving money, in fact. We were paying more for them. The liability of them taking care of themselves is way more of a risk than having a full-time caretaker. Now, because now again, how are you going to reconcile these notions of sympathies towards old folk care with also a high salary for those taking care of them? Someone's got to pay for it.
It's not high. It's not that high salary, I promise you. But like, no,
I'm saying it should be. I'm saying it should be high. People who spend all night taking care of, I want the people taking care of my elderly parents to be well paid and taken care of. I want them to have vacations, and I want them to have time off. I want them to have a beautiful home. Why would I want them to be undercut or just minimum wage? I want them to take my money, bro.
No, I understand. No, I appreciate that. But the issue is that like they are not the owners of that business. They are the employees of that business. They're not the ones profiting off that business. The owners are.
You can own and run a business to the degree that the regulators allow it in the open free market. I don't know how much you think old folk care should be regulated or not. But if it's not regulated market, then anyone and everyone could start their own business pertaining to that issue and that problem.
I feel like maybe in Canada they probably have a lot better, healthcare than we do, right? So I'm really just speaking on the side on like the American fence, in which that's saying that like businesses run companies in which that fines and fees from like the state being levied against them just become a cost of doing business, right? And essentially what's occurring here is that it's a form of tax that says you can do unethical things if you pay this tax, right? No one is really being held accountable, right? And my second issue is that this is on the American fence, right? Because maybe there's just like a difference in economy in which that we're speaking from, is that people are priced out of quality, right? If you don't have money for something, you don't get it. And normally that's fair. If you can't afford a Ferrari, you should not deserve a Ferrari. We can all agree on that. But we're not talking about luxury items like that. We're talking about healthcare. We're talking about housing. We're talking about like things in which that humans need to like not die, right? And I'm accepting the premise, or like my premise is that people are entitled to some things. They're the food, water, and dirt, right? Like land and house, like they're entitled to some things, like a cot, 3 meals a day, right? Basic things in which they can branch off from later, right? But like the fact of the matter is like we live in a world in which that if you cannot afford anything, you don't deserve to exist.
You're not even entitled to life. You're not entitled to anything. This weird entitlement is an odd thing. People are not born all the time. No one's entitled to life. So I don't know where the entitlement thing comes from. I get you're into it. I get you're like, I intuitively care about people, but I don't think
I mean, I
anyone's
think people are entitled to dignity.
entitled to it.
Yeah, like, you know, like, do you really want to live in a society in which that, like, you just see someone crucified on the side of the road every once in a while?
Of course not, but there's plenty of people that I don't show dignity to because they're not entitled to it.
I mean, like, I mean, like, in like some respect, like, so, like, if you see like an elderly homeless person like
You
rummaging
can
through the
provide
trash,
plenty
you
of
don't think that
examples where I
person
will
deserves
provide
dignity?
dignity, bro. You're straw manning again. Obviously, there's plenty of examples where I will provide dignity, but all I have to do is give you one example where I don't, and your claim's vacuous. There are plenty of times where I don't need to show anyone any dignity at all. They're not
I mean,
entitled to my dignity.
I'm using the word dignity. If you're not showing someone dignity, in my mind, you're breaking the law. So, like, inherently, you're going to show someone dignity for a legal reason.
Hmm. I don't think that's interesting. I don't know what law says I have to show people. There's like a huge. I don't know what
Like,
dignity
you
how
can't
it's being
assault
defined there.
people. You can't, you know, slander, liable. Those are crimes. You know, assault, battery. Those are
Yeah,
crimes. Like, those would
but
be
not
like not showing someone
non-dignity. Those
dignity.
are all different words. I'm looking for
Those are,
dignity.
yeah. Yeah, well, I'm using dignity as like an umbrella term in which that houses all these things that we're not allowed to do to other people.
What about just not respecting you?
Yeah, fine. Not, yeah, you don't
Is that
need
dignity?
respect.
Is that included under dignity? If
I
I
know,
don't
like,
respect you, do I show you dignity?
if you have like some level of disdain towards me, that's fair, right? You're
No, what
allowed
about
to
if I
ignore.
purposely go out of my way to disrespect you?
I mean, that's a form of harassment, no?
Not necessarily.
Well, like you're going out of your way to bother me.
Harassment's entirely different. I'm talking specifically about disrespect and whether or not disrespect counts under dignity. Me being disrespectful towards you, does that
I,
count under your definition of not showing dignity?
no, not necessarily. But like when you say go out of my way, that sounds like a form of harassment or like stalking.
No, those
But like
things are just like
if we're
persistent.
at the
Those are
supermarket,
persistent. I'm just saying one case of me going out of my way to make an unnecessary remark that's disrespectful towards you.
yeah,
That
if we're
is extremely disrespectful, in fact.
yeah,
That
if
doesn't
we're
break any laws and that just breaches your claim of entitlement to dignity.
no, it doesn't, right? Because
Okay.
you just I don't think it does because like you have a First Amendment right here in America. Like if you want to, like if we're standing in line,
So if someone walks by me and I say, "You're a stupid bitch," you think I'm showing that person dignity?
yeah, I would say
Hey,
that's
hey, loser. Every time they walk by me, I say, "Hey, loser, you're a
well,
stupid
every
bitch."
time they walk by you, that would be harassment.
No, I'm not following them. I'm not going. I'm not. When you say go out of my way, I meant it just like there's no reason for me to be doing it, but I'm not like following them around or anything. It's just we
I
happen to be at a similar place, and every time I see them, I don't like them, and it's for specific reasons, but I don't need to explain those reasons. I just don't think they're entitled to my dignity, so I go out of my way to disrespect them.
well, I feel like that would eventually fall into some kind of harassment. Um,
Maybe,
like
maybe it would.
if
Maybe it
we
would.
live if we live in the same neighborhood and I walk past your front porch to get to my house, like to get to my house, if we're neighbors, right, and you're shouting over your fence every time you see me in my backyard, like you're an asshole, right?
What? What is? I don't know. Is that illegal? I don't know. Harassment.
That does seem like a form of harassment.
I don't know. Yeah, maybe. But I think it's still. I'm just trying to push the boundaries on like whether you're entitled to dignity. Entitlements also like the law doesn't really make our entitlements. Just let's say the law didn't uphold those things. Now it's not as if we aren't. To your point, you're not trying to say that now we aren't entitled to those things, right? Is the law somehow constitutive of our entitlements?
Well, I would. My suspicion is that the law is idealistic by nature. Like the law is trying to provide something, right? Universal, right? It's trying to come to some kind of understanding. It's trying to objectify something that is subjective.
I don't know. Okay.
And like most laws throughout history, from like recorded history, has like converged on some common themes, right? And those common themes are like, hey, let's not do random violence towards people who don't deserve it.
Yeah, but I just don't know how it links to like an entitlement. We agree, I'll come to consensus that people like we shouldn't do those things. I just don't know if people are like entitled to like if we're going to extend entitlements, I would extend it to people's lives. Everyone's entitled to life, but that's a lie. So I don't understand how we're going to uphold that entitlement. If everyone's entitled to life, well, like I don't understand how that entitlement would ever be upheld. So it seems like there's no such thing as an entitlement then.
I mean, like, if no one's entitled to do anything, then no one's entitled to do anything, right? Like, you're not entitled to do bad things. You're not entitled to do good things,
Yeah,
right?
that was my first claim is that we don't really have any entitlements. I would agree.
And like, it seems that there is an opportunity in which that because there's this because no one's entitled to anything, there just emerges opportunities to do stuff, right? And it seems that capitalism allows the opportunities for like bad ethics or bad morals.
No, it's the exact opposite. The only opportunities in the market, therefore, are ones of consensual mutual cooperation and trade.
But that doesn't mean it's ethical, right? Because
But
right
that's the
now,
only ethical option. That would literally
no,
be the only ethical option. The other
no,
ones would be steal, do what you want. I don't understand what the other options are.
well,
Why
like
would
people, like
consensually
criminal.
trading with someone mutually? What the hell?
I mean, the issue with this is like criminal organizations engage in free marketplaces, right? They are perfectly, they're
To the degree that they're non-coercive and consensual, I totally dismiss what they're doing. To the degree that they're corrupting and violent, I don't think they're participating in open free trade.
well, they're trading with somebody,
Yeah,
right?
so to the degree that those trades are consensual, I dismiss it as totally fine and under my normative view, legal. Like, for instance, don't you think we should decriminalize drugs?
Some drugs, not all drugs.
But again, that's a perspective. So you think criminalizing them helps?
I think that there is too much of like certain drugs have too much psychological control over an individual in which that benefits profit over well-being, right? So like
But
if I'm smelling like smack, for example, right? Like a really
dude, I
hard
sympathize with
substance.
this. I'm sorry to cut you off, but I'm just too saturated in like that culture to even like talk about it that in depthly. I just want to say about like you obviously understand the war on drugs is a criminalization problem though, right?
No, I'm not saying the war on drugs is a good thing, but also allowing companies
Because
to
it
profit off of
criminalizes
addiction is
because it,
also a bad thing.
I agree,
Yeah.
bro. I totally agree with that. But if we're gonna come at it with a solution, I don't see how regulating it is it right. Criminalizing it seems to further uh interrogate. Sorry, what's the word I'm looking for? Further irritate the problem.
So like we just decriminalize it and we say you can't profit off of it.
Some
Like you
countries,
can't,
that's
like
what's
there.
Canada. That's literally what the city I'm in has done. I mean, you could criticize it, but like, yeah, there's open injection sites everywhere. They hand out free syringes. You can buy any drug you want, any store, literally at the stores, you can buy any drug you want.
It
So
just
yeah,
sounds
it's
like
open
what's wrong.
air drug policy. Anyone can camp anywhere. Basically, it's just a huge hippie town that it's laissez-faire drugs.
Wait, are you saying that you can go buy H
Yeah, yeah.
at
I
like a
mean, because
store?
there's a difference here. There's going to be a little bit of a difference here, right? Between the legal, there's one place where you can literally get anything. How legal it is and everything is kind of like up for question. But then the pharmaceutical aspect really does open the door, right? Because in terms of like opiates and stuff, that's where most people are getting their supply. They're not even going to these legal places. But yeah, there's legal places you can get snow. There's legal places you can literally get LSD, mushrooms. It's crazy.
I mean, personally, I don't have an issue with like, mushrooms or LSD stuff like that. But like when it comes to like harder substances in which like addiction is like more obvious, not just allow companies to profit off addiction.
But the irony of that is that the highly regulated pharmaceutical bodies that you're sort of like pointing towards or at least adjacent to regulate these issues are the form the like the leading cause of the opiate epidemic in the city. Like I just said, they're getting their supplies from doctors and pharmaceuticals, and then getting hooked on it, and then going to the open injection sites that are government funded and regulated to sustain their
I
habit.
I don't think we necessarily disagree on this point. Like it's just like
Well, the
it's a
point is just about regulation and the fact that like your claim about being skeptical of like human greed, human nature, and all those things, and like the grotesque nature of human addiction and all those kinds of things, but attributing that to capitalism, or maybe you're just like critiquing it in general. I sympathize with that, but like I don't. The laissez-faire idea isn't to like sanitize humanity. I just think it's the most ethical way to operate in the chaos that we're in. Like, not if you can't openly trade with people, I don't even know where we would start to regulate things or politically. Oh, like if I can't go down and buy a pack of here's a huge one: going down to the block, buying a pack of cigarettes illegally, technically, right? Aboriginal, indigenous people, they get wholesale discounts on tobacco. So that's a first corruption. The government doesn't tax tobacco sold to indigenous communities here. Okay, so they get huge cartons of cigarettes for really cheap. Then they go on the block. Well, not indigenous people, just whoever gets their hands on these cheap cartons of cigarettes, go on the block and sell them for $5, cheapest cigarettes you can get in the city. So there's already levels of corruption there. And then you're going to tell me that me going to the block and buying a pack of cigarettes somehow contributes to that, when I see that as the most ethical element of the entire chain of exchange. The only thing that's ethical on that whole thing is the fact that guy has spent $20 to get a carton. He's flipping each one for $5, and I'm more than happy to pay $5 and give him some profit. And the fact he's profit seeking and I'm profit seeking, I want to smoke my lungs out, and he wants an extra couple bucks. The mutual exchange there seems to be literally the only thing holding society to fucking together. Literally.
Are you like a anarcho-capitalist?
Kind of, probably under certain semantics that could be defined as that, but I do hear you out on, we kind of got into a little bit about the importance of the monopoly, if you want to use that term, over violence and stuff. So I'm kind of open-minded, and it's a little difficult to articulate the nuances here. It's a pretty nuanced discussion. I don't like just labeling myself, but if I'm an anarchist, I don't think under most people's perspective I'm like much of one. But like, yeah, I'm not much of a rule follower either, and I don't like authority. So definitely, yeah, I don't know.
I mean, like, authority isn't supposed to be there all the time. It's only supposed to be there in times of crisis, right? So like we give the authority monopoly over crisis.
I just give it over truth. Like if I was in a crisis and then some authoritative actor came along, I still wouldn't necessarily agree with their authority. Maybe I would go along with them to save myself or whatever, but I would still be skeptical of their authority. The ultimate authority for me is something like God or truth or what's in my heart, something like that. Like, so like something like math, probably, or logic. Those things are like the ultimate authority from my perspective.
I think
logic more than math.
I think my main concern is like profit is like there's like an infinite regress problem with profit in which that just accelerates and like the number gets bigger and bigger and bigger, right? And people are more and more priced out of that free marketplace. So like I don't think someone's entitled to make infinite money. I don't think
that's the issue there, is like no one is entitled to it, and I don't know where this like claim is really coming from, because although we do have some big dinosaurs and big monsters in the marketplace, the majority of it is small business startups and business actors that are like working through growing their business, which is a good thing. So that's not something to be skeptical of. It's like, I don't understand the issue that they want to grow their business. It's not an infinite thing. Most people end up selling their business, retiring, or giving their kids their business, and then the kids either flop it or they grow it, or maybe it's stagnant, stays kind of stagnant, doesn't really grow, right? Like you're talking about big shareholder, you're talking about public entities. Not everything's an LLC. Not everything's tradable on the stock market with corporate shareholders. Like a lot of the main market I'm talking about, what about me and the guy selling cigarettes? There's no infinite profit there. You got his $2 and I got my cigarettes. What's the issue?
Yeah, I mean, like if you want to talk about interpersonal capitalism, sure, I'm game, right? But the issue is like institutions emerge that exert power as that of a government.
But what you don't want is that those institutions implement themselves through like tyrannical violence or like just arbitrary means. What you want, what you said you wanted, I think, is some like democratic system, right? But that seems to still be upheld by the choices and freedoms of people's voice, independent actors to conglomerate into like a movement or a campaign, right? That actually mobilizes the citizenry into some ideology. So it's still free market acting, campaigning, marketing, selling a logo, selling a brand, selling a person's identity. Campaigning is still free, like literally fundraising. Even and then talking about how you're going to institute, actual industrial changes or agricultural changes or whatever the changes are. It's directly pertaining to the market. Without free market actors and mutually beneficial consensual trade, politics wouldn't even exist. It's built off the backs of capitalism. It's literally relies on capitalism. It relies on small business owners and people, entrepreneurs in the free market, moving their money around. Who do you think becomes politicians for the most part? Right? It's people
No,
with
I
money who
agree.
are
I
trying to,
agree.
who see how fucked the regulations are, who are trying to find safe havens and safety nets for their own wealth.
No, like I 100 agree. I mean, maybe I'm just more idealistic, and right, like maybe my head isn't. But at the same time, it's there. If you don't feel obligated to help people, I can't tell you to help people.
And
Probably
that's
breaking
not
up.
an issue to me. I think that's fine. Not everyone has to help. Like that's what I mean. I don't think we need a big government entity to come in, force everyone to help or to help everyone, right? It's fine if some people. I mean, if you want to help people, that's a great thing, and I encourage helping. But again, no one's entitled to anyone's help. But our heroes help people. I look up to people those that do help and that aren't purely profit seeking. But in terms of profit seeking, I think that this is an interesting like etymology, the word profit and where it comes up in like our culture, how skeptical we are of the term, because the term generally is like a fairly positive term. And I don't know why it comes with this weird baggage that it comes with today. Because like again, under mutually consensual conditions, it seems like a very clearly positive thing. For us to profit, for you and I to profit. If I have more tomatoes and you have more potatoes and we trade, now we're both profiting. I don't see what the issue is. Like, I had too many potatoes. Please take them. They're going bad. You have too many tomatoes. Now we trade a few, and you have more tomatoes. I have more potatoes. I don't see the issue. We're both profiting. It's positive.
I mean, the issue is like when someone doesn't profit, and now you're starving, right? That's the
Well,
problem.
well, there's a risk with the trade, right? Because how we measure profit is like, well, not only intersubjective, it's actually subjective, right? Because every one man's trash is another man's treasure, which I've said like 4 times throughout today. I gotta find another saying to say, but so like the value of things, you want the freedom to value things on your own subjective terms. You don't want someone else. When you see a good deal, not everyone's going to agree with you. You have to be able to sort of speculate on the value of things and determine for yourself what things are worth. Imagine if that was regulated, that would literally rob everyone of their in like innovative. I don't know, innovative like creativity.
I mean, like I don't think anything can rob anyone of their creativity. Like I don't think capitalism
Well,
is the.
regulating prices does.
I
Regulating
don't.
prices definitely does because the whole incentive to be creative and solve problems for people is profit. And like if you regulate price and there's no price signal in the market that's actually soundly connected to the incentives that people want, like market actors, what they're asking for, what they need their problem solved for, then there won't be any like price signals to incentivize people to actually partake in those markets and industries and solve the problems that people have. The price signals are everything. That's literally because even like imagine us trying to use it's better than the English language or making a sign or an ad because price signals are literally pure incentive, right? Incentive signals that are like multilingual. They're not they're not really pertaining to one specific language or anything.
I just kind of disagree with the characterization that capitalism is the ultimate midwife for creativity. Creativity is just going to happen. Like creativity is like spontaneous.
I don't agree that the creativity of people will be incentivized. The important word is incentivized towards the good without something like capitalism. Why would we be incentivized to mutually benefit and cooperate? Why not just be selfish, greedy humans who eliminate each other, which we have been throughout the majority of history? Why not?
I think we're incentivized. I think it's interesting. Like, I think we're incentivized to be greedy in a non-violent way.
Exactly.
I don't think we're incentivized.
That's thanks to capitalism. That's thanks to the incentives of profit. We know that if we kill off our enemies, we won't be able to work with them and trade from them. You use the word exploit, but when both parties are trying to exploit each other, that looks like more like a competitive game like capitalism, because the regulations set themselves. If they're, as long as they're pertaining to it's like a game of cards, right? Like, you don't have to go to the table, but once we're playing, you're not a victim to the luck of the cards, right? The cards are drawn how they're drawn, and just because one guy has a stack of chips, you don't get to sit down and say, oh, this game is rigged. He built his stack. I don't understand what the problem is. He might have had some luck on his side, yes, he's profit motivated, but the game is not rigged. He's playing by the rules.
But the issue is that you are forced at gunpoint to sit at the poker table. You're forced to participate
By
in the
who?
economy.
By what? By the
By
government?
the marketplace. The marketplace is forced to participate in it.
What do you mean the marketplace? What do you mean? What exactly do you mean there?
You are forced to participate in the market because the market is incentivized to make you participate. Its incentive is its profit.
How am I can you provide, like, trying to think of what you exactly mean? Like, where, so I'm not trying to like straw man you here. Just, do you mind providing an example so I can kind of more clearly understand what you mean? Like, how would I be forced into any marketing? What example do I have to do? I don't understand.
I mean, housing is a good example.
I don't have a house.
Oh, no, car insurance is a good example.
Maybe I don't have a car.
Maybe you don't have a car. Okay. Well,
I'm not trying to say that to like. I'm trying to say that to prove the point that you don't have to operate in the car market. I do have a car, but like the point is, you're trying to make the point that I'm being forced to pay car insurance or something. I have to use the car market. Like, no, I don't have to drive cars. I don't understand. Yes, there's a regulating body making me pay insurance. Is that what you mean? I'm forced to pay insurance, like, so it would be better if we could just all drive cars without insurance type thing?
Well, insurance is a marketplace, right? Because it is a business in which people profit off of, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, I guess, like, if you are a human being that lives on Earth, right, the dirt you stand on right now is privately owned or publicly owned. It's not owned by you. So fundamentally, you are going to have to adhere to whatever private or public land you are standing on, i.e., you are forced to participate in that market because you're standing on either A, public property, or B, private property, in which you are obligated to do a thing, right? And even if you buy your own private property, right, you still are subject to tax.
You're not I see what you're saying. You're always under the laws of the land. You can't really escape that. But I don't know, again, if that's like a open example of like an open free marketplace. That looks more like a government entity regulating. Like, if you go back 100 years or even 200 years, like especially in North America, the land was very like free. It's called the Wild Wild West. There really weren't many regulations, literally. Like, in terms, it was literally like a lawless land, basically.
Yeah, but like, like, there's always that classic scene in those old movies in which the guy kind of waltzes into the business shop and says, you have to pay protection, right?
But again, I don't understand. So these are like new developments that like when you say we're being forced into it, like I'm providing examples of history where humans were not at all part of that regime of the private property marketplace. But like again, that regulating that seems more, especially like with public land, that seems more like a government entity than it does like an issue about freedom or like that you are being forced to participate in anything.
I mean, I'm sure you're gonna say that I'm making a straw man out of yourself, but it's just like no one is making you, because like in my mind, you kind of need a car, especially here in the West, right? I know
Oh,
that it's
there's
a privilege and not a right, but like in order to participate in broader society, you require a vehicle,
I
by
mean,
and large.
again, I've always had a vehicle, but I have tons of friends in the city that are mid 30s that have never driven, that have full-time jobs. I have one friend that's a couple, girlfriend, boyfriend, neither of them have ever driven. They have full-time jobs, mid 30s. Which I know that from my perspective, I agree with you. It's crazy, but they seem to get along just fine, and that seems to be actually pretty normal in this city. A lot of people. It's actually kind of more inconvenient to drive in Vancouver than it is to like bike or walk around or take transit. But I hear what you're saying, but I don't know what your point is. Really,
I mean, if you want to buy food, you have to go to a supermarket.
if you want to buy food, no, no. I don't know really what you mean there either. No.
If you want food, you have to buy it from someone,
I
or you
could
have to farm it.
literally, I could literally set my bedroom up into a growing op, buy a bunch of growing
Exactly. And
lights
who do you
off
pay
of.
rent?
Pardon me,
Who do you pay rent to?
a landlord. Like why?
Yeah, you're subject to, so if landlords that don't grow shit in my house,
You're breaking
right?
up, dog.
You're only allowed to grow that food in your house if your landlord permits it.
That's not true either. We're going back to like legal ramifications. Like if the law permits it, the landlord doesn't get to dictate what I do in my own space. This goes back to private property laws. He's renting the space to
No, he
me, so it's actually private property under. He can't trespass in this apartment even though he owns it. Did you know that?
no, but
If
he
I,
can just price you. He can just price you out and be like, I
you
don't want this
understand
guy
that
to
my
live here.
landlord doesn't even have
He
permission to
doesn't.
come into his own unit because I'm here, right? He's renting it to
No,
me.
that's not where we're disagreeing. What I'm saying is
Okay.
like the landlord has lots of strategies in which to say fuck you in a legal sense.
I have lots of strategies that protect me as well. Like I could just squat and he actually can't. Like I could literally exploit him as well and
All right,
just
now
squat in this apartment, piss on all the walls. His damage deposit isn't worth shit and he would be fucked in the end. So he's taking a huge
it's
risk
not
too.
relying on regulation. That's not a free marketplace because now you're equally exploiting him.
Well, a free marketplace, right, would look when it extends to these kinds of disputes would look like violence. So it actually is still better than what you're advocating for, which be he just knocks down the door and we fight, I guess, or like I don't know what you're advocating for.
No, what I'm saying is what he has the power to do already, which is not renew your lease.
Right.
He
That's
can agree
good.
not to continue the contract.
Which is good. That's a good thing, right?
Yeah, but
You
like
wouldn't you
what I'm
wouldn't
saying,
want to you wouldn't want to say he couldn't do that.
no, but this all started because we were talking about how you are forced to participate in the marketplace.
But I'm not. Like I didn't have to come to this apartment. I didn't have to pay rent. I don't understand what you're saying. I don't have to. I could
Okay, but
literally go in a tent.
you
I could
want if
literally go in a tent right now downtown, pitch up a tent for free, and live there.
okay, and then you're gonna still have to be obligated, like you're still gonna be obliged to participate in some market.
Like what? Picture it this way. Picture it this way. What if all the interactions I do are illegal? Am I still participating in the market under your view?
That is the
You're
market.
not steel manning the like actual operation of the market, which is this mutually beneficial consent of exchange. You're picturing like criminal activity and thievery and robbery and things and like greed all as parts of capitalism, but those are just human qualities. If someone's operating in crime their entire life, They're not operating in the open free market. It's the exact opposite of the open free market.
I mean, my
They're
issue with
criminals.
this is
They're stealing. They're right. That's literally a criminal. It's the opposite
my,
of what I'm saying.
my issue with this is that like capitalism is a human thing, and you're making capitalism sound like it's not a human thing. As if participating in this system, we're entering into like this weird new divine realm in which that is all well and good.
You're actually doing that, man. You're saying that somehow capitalism is like expected to alleviate all the human conditions of greed and corruption. And I'm just saying those things are going to exist regardless of how you regulate them. You're trying to say regulators are like that. I don't have any like moral leanings towards people's exchanges. As long as they're consensual, I could totally be like, wow, that was profoundly unethical, that exchange under my view, but it could still happen, and what am I going to do about it? That's just, it's like going into nature and literally seeing a tiger eat a gazelle. I don't understand how I'm going to have moral implication. I can morally reflect how I would act, but I'm not going to morally implicate the lion. And so, like, obviously I'm going to stray away from lions in the wilderness, but I'm not going to regulate them out of existence. I don't understand why that would be the answer.
Yeah, but Jeff Bezos isn't a lion in the wild. And right, as a people, right, we have powers in which to regulate individuals, right? Like a regulatory body is really just the participants.
That's another lion. It's just another lion. I don't understand that's what I'm saying. I don't understand why is one preferred over the other. It's just why is Jeff Bezos preferred to Donald Trump?
No. The issue with this is that like after neglecting the consumer.
You're chopping up again, bro. Can't hear you.
No, I just said like I feel like you're just neglecting the consumer.
I'm the only one standing up for the consumer. What are you talking about? You think the consumer...
No, you're standing up for the person who's allowed to profit. The person profiting isn't necessarily the consumer.
Yeah, that's because you're pinholing the consumer into a victim mindset. So you don't think any consumer can be mutually beneficial? Anytime anyone consumes... If I buy something of consumption, all of a sudden that rids me of my profit? Consumers are the ultimate profiteers. They're not producing anything, they're consuming. That's what profit. That's what profit. If profit, all you can do with it is either reinvest it or consume it. And the consumers are the ones that are literally not reusing the financial responsibility. I don't understand how that's not the purest form of profit. Taking it for themselves.
No, but the consumer is the one who's motivated to regulate the market because the consumer wants to ensure that they're buying quality goods. Right? If I'm a consumer and I want to buy a loaf of bread, I'm going to regulate the guy I buy bread from, saying you can't put sawdust in my bread. I want bread, not sawdust. That's a form of regulation. So there is going to be a regulatory body to protect the consumer's interests. I don't think we necessarily disagree. I think we're just looking at it from a different perspective.
To be honest, I just have no idea what your conclusion here is getting at. I think we were on train for a bit there, but now I think we've lost track a little bit of where this is kind of headed. And I don't really understand the point you're trying to make.
Goods they buy to ensure they're buying what they want to buy. Because the consumer is in direct competition with their buyer, right? Their buyer wants to make a profit, and the consumer wants to make a profit.
Why can't there just be a mutually beneficial exchange? Why is one a consumer and one a producer in your mind? I don't understand why. Even if I'm the consumer, why am I a producer could want to regulate the consumer in a sense too.
Well, that's just the
Like,
behavior. That's just like the behavior, right? Because like fundamentally, like I'm a farmer and you're a fisherman, right? We can't, we have different specialties. So in this instant, I'm a consumer right now. But in retrospect, like I could also be a producer. Like that's what Amazon does.
but
And
the
it's like
point
you
is
just
about it being mutually beneficial. Like, I don't understand. It doesn't matter if you're the consumer or producer. It's about who's profiting. And if we both profit, then I don't see what the issue is. What is the issue? You give me $5, I give you a chocolate bar I made. You now have a chocolate bar and you're more full, and I have my $5. We both profited. What is the problem?
the problem is how we regulate that system.
It's unregulated. It's not
Then how?
regulated.
I mean, the issue.
How would anyone ever regulate that? I bake you a brownie and you give me $5. How would anyone ever regulate that?
If you bake me a brownie and like you have just like terrible health conditions in your kitchen that you bake this brownie and rat shit gets into it and you sell me a rat shit brownie, right? And there's no regulation. There's no remedy to correct that.
I'm not
I
I'm
just
not
get a
saying
disease.
I'm not saying that like food health standards and regulations don't improve the market. I'm saying that in terms of the freedom of people to exchange, the reality is that's totally a viable possibility, and no one could actually regulate the reality of someone potentially getting rat poison in a brownie. That
Yeah,
happens.
we're not disagreeing with that in a sense, but like it seems that you don't like the idea that like there is an expect like that regulation is necessary.
No,
Like you
I've already
cannot have a
conceded
free
that in some
marketplace without
cases.
regulation.
I've already conceded that in some cases it might be necessary. But it's not, but it seems as though you want to push back on our freedom to exchange things. I don't understand why you'd want that in most cases to be regulated, right?
Well, but to
Like,
ensure that I'm buying what I want to buy.
well, but there is no way. You're paying for false insurance because the people buy rat poison brownies and it happens, right? So you paid the government and they didn't do their job, and so what did you pay the government for? I don't know. You think most people are just like, for the most part, these conditions and standards are being upheld by the very industrious people in the field. It's not like a politician goes in there and like sets the standards of food safe. Like usually it's ex chefs and stuff and managers of restaurants.
Yeah, no, obviously there's going to be some kind of like regulatory body and like some kind of minister or officer in which that enforces these laws, right? But it just seems that like the consequence of not like the consequence of essentially frauding your consumer becomes cost of doing business instead of something that bars you from doing business. Like if a business owner transgresses the consumer, they should not be able to participate in an open marketplace. They
Well,
should be barred from
that
that.
isn't participating in the free marketplace.
It is when it becomes it is when it becomes like certified by the state in which the state says,
No,
okay, you can do this thing.
that's exact opposite. As soon as you have state sanctioned and regulated things, that's not the open free marketplace, right?
But the state, well, it depends. First of all, I might agree with you, but because we live in a democratic society, I would say the state is an extension of the marketplace because we have consumers and producers both voting on regulatory bodies. Like they are equally participating in a third space, and they're agreeing with this in a third space to apply it to the marketplace. So like we're stepping out, like both consumer and producer are stepping out of the marketplace to come to an agreement of how that marketplace should be ran.
Okay. I mean, enforcing policies is just another investment tactic. If you're going to enforce a policy and regulate a market, that's just going to be another campaign and fundraiser and going to take more capital to enforce, right? So it's just another investment
Yeah, and
case.
what I'm saying is like the state is an extension of the market, and you're saying the
As
state
long
is
as they're
not part of the market.
uncoercive, as long as they're uncoercive,
Well, that's what
right?
democracy is supposed to be. It's supposed to be uncoercive, in which that we come to a consensus.
But no, democracy has nothing to do with freedom of exchange. The consensus too. We're not trying to talk about democracy. We're trying to talk about capitalism and free market exchange and how ethical that is.
Yeah, but capitalism uses democracy, right? It uses the
No,
dollar. It uses the dollars as a means of voting. If you have a
that's
bad
interesting.
business, you will
That's an
go out of
interesting
business.
viewpoint, but I would view the other way. I would say that democracy uses capitalism, but I would agree with you that you're voting with your dollar way more than you vote in a democratic system.
Yeah, we're just using like Democrat as like a means of voting. Your dollar is how you vote. And so inherently there's going to be disparity. One, there's a disparity because more people have more voting power than others, right? Maybe that's justified, but I'm not really interested in debating that right now. But like fundamentally is like if you do not have like the marketplace requires a certain environment in order in order to flourish, right? And that environment is set up by the state. If a marketplace is in a shitty environment, it's going to be a shitty marketplace.
I don't think a healthier marketplace requires any state enforcement. I think there's lots of healthy
Well, how are
marketplaces
you
that don't have any government intervention at all.
how are you supposed to run a business? Like how are you supposed to run your bakery when the cartel is coming down and taking your profit?
That's my point, though. I don't understand why you keep reverting to things like cartels, monopolies, and government bodies when I'm trying to talk about open free markets.
No, because these things
You and I
are
have to be clear, bro, you and I have the same criticisms of all those examples. So I don't
no,
understand why you keep going back to that. I would like to hear criticism of the open free market and why you're so skeptical of just like the freedom of exchanging goods and why that can't be mutually beneficial and profitable. You seem to
well,
be skeptical of that point.
I'm skeptical. I'm not like individuals, yeah, but the issue is like monopolies naturally occur, right? And we want to prevent monopolies because monopolies prevent like a free marketplace.
Well, I would, for the most part, agree with you there too. But like, I mean, we also went into the nuanced example of the potential of a regulatory body, maybe over violence or something. So I'm open-minded, but for the most part, yeah.
Okay. I feel like there maybe there's just miscommunication that became an argument that was not necessary.
Well, I think what it is a little skepticism of the word capitalism, which is fine. That's healthy. But consumerism a little bit being synonymous with capitalism, like you're trying to maybe conflate those two a little bit, and the issues that you have with like the human condition, greed, you know, human condition, greed, you know, exchange. If you don't want to call it capitalism, don't really have to, right? But I would say that like that is one of the most progressive parts of humanity that keep the peace and incentivize people, even who are greedy criminals, to work together so that like like it's for me a miracle that in these highly criminalized black markets there are even in those circumstances emergent profiteering from both mutually benefiting parties. For instance, going back to the drug example, I think there are genuine examples of mutually beneficial exchanges there going on under the government's nose, untaxed. I think the government knows it, and I think that is a testament to open free market capitalism that can't be regulated. And you can criticize and be skeptical of it, but I think it's a testament to like human freedom and autonomy and the beauty of like free markets, basically. Even under the nose of regulatory bodies, these exchanges still occur, and you can put your nose up in the air and you can scoff them off, but you know, in the depths of prison, in the cells of prison, what do you think's going on there? These same exchanges,
Yeah,
right?
I agree with you that the marketplace is just going to be a natural emergent property of human behavior. But I would also extend that to regulatory body, like regulation is going to be a natural emergence. And it seems like you don't want to put a name to regulation when regulation is always going to be present in some fashion. Like I have a bias towards capitalism, and you have a bias towards the word regulation.
Only because in terms of my freedom to exchange, like I like regulation, but not market regulation. So it's interesting to talk like your distinction on the monopoly of violence there was potent, right? Because when we talk about violence, that's not really a market profiteering like venture, although it could result in profit. It's basically the opposite, right? It's the destruction. It's not even consumption. It's like the destruction of capital. So for the most part, yeah, like I don't think that a regulatory body in terms of like market acting, not only is it like unethical, I don't even think it's like really possible like to demonstrate go into prison, right? See the black market functioning just fine in prison. You lock people
Yeah,
in
but
cells,
even
take all their apparent freedoms away, and they still function.
but even a black market has regulations.
Okay, so that's where this gets interesting because like when we talk about a regulatory body, like you're using coercion and like violence again as like a market actor. Like if a cartel entity like out competes by violently like unaliving their competition, that again we're not then participating in free market acting, mutual exchange. But how is that mutually beneficial exchange? You just unalived his competition. Mutually beneficial exchange looks like the cocoa farmer sells the leaf, and then the leaf is grounded in a warehouse somewhere into the shit, and then some guy picks up a bag, comes to the street, and then the junkie buys it. That's the chain of like, as long as no one's like murdered in the process or schmurdered, whatever word I'm allowed to use on here, then that seems like literally all a functioning chain of economic, like I don't know, production. You can try
I
to
mean,
regulate it. You can try
it's
to regulate it. We've
I
just
mean
seen the issues historically with that.
even if we lived in a totally like deprived society, it would still be functioning. Like you could still decapitate your competition and be a functioning society.
Perhaps, I guess, but I don't see the ethics behind that, and that's why I'm leaning towards like the mutually beneficial. Isn't it again a miracle that like emergent out of all these historical disputes that usually end in violence, we have one that kind of resulted in both the Enlightenment era and the Industrial Age that seemed to be hinged on capitalism, which is also hinged on the sovereignty of individuals to make their own consensual exchanges and trades of commodities. It's literally based in that cross-culturally, internationally, the global trade system. It's what changed humanity and society. Not regulatory bodies, not monarchs, not big conglomerates of politicians, not military regimes, not tyrants or social democracies or communist entities, none of those things, right? It's free market capitalism that actually incentivizes us to go and bake bread and sell lemonade and play hockey and all the wonderful things that we have in life.
I mean, I think being hungry incentivizes us to bake bread. I don't think capitalism does. And I just think you just
For
don't like you.
bake bread for others. What about baking bread for others?
Yeah, because they.
Really? You think survival incentivizes us to bake bread for others?
Yeah,
Not
because
capitalism.
we're social creatures. We survive in
Nah.
social groups.
Nah, man. How much bread have you baked for other people for free?
Yeah, because you get some social currency out of that exchange.
Zero. That's the answer to that was zero, right?
Well, the answer is like you get someone's labor, right? Like currency can be exchanged by other means. Like if I bake my friend bread, my friend might give me a fish later.
Oh,
Like
but
this
that's
is
my
the
point.
presence of
That's
gift
mutual
giving.
exchange. You don't need money for capitalism. You don't need a central authoritative currency that's minted by a Federal Reserve to participate in capitalism. In fact, that's quite anti-capitalist. That's again central bodied, regulatory. It's not distributed at all. It doesn't look like the free open market if you're mandated to use a centralized currency that's printed by a Federal Reserve. That goes back to monarchies and things like that we were talking about, the feudal system. Open free market exchange looks like you and I when we were kids trading Pokemon cards. And then the government comes in and which is the teacher and says no trading at school. And then you and I just go back on the bus and do the trade anyway after even Now the trade's even more delegated because we spent all class debating what the trade's going to be, and when we get on the bus, we actually execute the trade. Regulations don't do anything. In fact, they just make the teachers and regulatory bodies, right? The teacher in that analogy looks inefficiently dumb. She would have been smarter to even like maybe levy the trade in a class setting. It's similar to the government trying to institute any. What happens, bro, is the government and our conglomerate of representatives needs price signaling in order to justify and determine any restrictions and regulations to begin with. How are we going to regulate the market without data-driven analysis, right? To put the strategies in place to limit the market. In other words, the regulators themselves, like you kind of pertained to earlier, are actually using market data to make their decisions. So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy that the more you regulate the market, the less price-driven data and signaling you're going to get from the genuine autonomous market actors. Giving the sovereignty and freedom to the people is actually the empowering move of the like dominant government regime. The globalist regime is I guess empowering individuals to make their own sovereign decisions because that's how you profiteer in a capitalist market.
I mean, like getting back to your Pokemon analogy, right? We are acting as both the market and the regulatory at the same time, right? I'm not familiar with Magic cards, but like if you said like I'll trade you my Pokemon for your Charizard, and I'm like that's bullshit. Charizard is worth more than Pikachu, right? That's a form of regulation within the market. So like there is like the market is inherently has a form of regulation within it because it's trying to determine what is valuable and what is not valuable.